Chapter 26-25, Foolish Azure, they're finally here. When Wildfighter saw the approaching Crimson Dragon flying ship and flying mounts, he revealed a faint smile on his face as he commented, "What a grand entrance. It's a pity that they don't know just how much suppression the ancient secret lands trial places on the mana bodies of players. In the end, they'll just be wasting their time and energy. Too bad we have to waste our chance to challenge the hero trial as well," Crimson Star said, sighing. Although Violet Sword had managed to produce the necessary tools for prolonging players' survival inside the ancient secret land ahead of schedule, thanks to Silent Wonder's help, and caught up to Mythology's production speed, Violet Sword had also lost an opportunity to surpass Mythology. Based on their understanding of the ancient secret land's elite trial, they were bound to conquer it if given another 10 days or so. However, the privileges players would obtain from the elite trial were far inferior to those of the hero trial. This matter is no longer relevant. Although we will be losing our opportunity to challenge the hero trial, Mythology won't necessarily be able to clear it either. In the end, our guilds will end up even, Tori said calmly. Looking at the Crimson Dragon flying ship slowly descending from the sky, he continued, "Rather than us, Zero Wing will be the one in great trouble if it fails to conquer the hero trial." "That's right. Zero Wing has most likely made the worst possible decision this time," Wildfighter said, nodding in agreement with Tori's words. Zero Wing had dispatched over 100 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies to challenge the ancient secret land this time. While this would indeed increase Zero Wing's reputation, it would also attract plenty of hidden dangers to the guild. In the current God's domain, the competition between the various superpowers was intensifying. If a guild capable of threatening the livelihoods of the superpowers were to appear, the fate of this guild would go without saying. After today, quite a few superpowers would probably join hands to exterminate this rising threat. Of course, if Zero Wing overcame the hero trial, then it would have a much easier time dealing with those future problems. Conversely, failure would mean a nightmare for the guild. According to the report we received, Zero Wing has come to an agreement with Azure. In exchange for borrowing Azure's strength, Zero Wing has agreed to nurture some of Azure's young talents. If on top of Azure's help, Zero Wing asks us to send in a large number of peak experts, Zero Wing might actually have a fighting chance of defeating the trial boss, Crimson Star said. The only question now is whether Zero Wing will make this request or not. Azure's leaders have gone insane. While Zero Wing's top combatants are indeed exceedingly strong, how could Zero Wing possibly be a match for Violet Sword in nurturing talents? Because of this matter, many in the guild's upper echelon are very dissatisfied with Azure, Wildfighter said in exasperation. The guild leader also declared that we are to stop nurturing Azure's young talents from now on. With this, Azure has basically severed Solitary Frost's and Yan Xiaoqian's futures. Tori revealed an ugly expression at the mention of this matter. As for Crimson Star, she shook her head and sighed when she thought about the futures of those two talents. Setting aside Azure's other members, Solitary Frost and Yan Xiaoqian were people capable of catching Tori's eye. They had the potential to become legendary figures in Azure. This was just like the commander of Violet Sword's strongest trump card Legion. Back then, the commander had similarly caught Tori's eye. Now he had already become a legendary figure in Violet Sword, his strength rivaling even the 5 great super guild's old monsters. Such experts could bring prosperity to an entire guild. Moreover, Solitary Frost and Yan Xiaoqian's youth meant they could guarantee stability for Azure for the next 2 or 3 decades. Now, however, Azure had personally severed the futures of these two people. During the time Wildfighter and the others were conversing with each other, the Crimson Dragon flying ship and the flying mounts landed before Violet Light City's main gate. A short moment later, cloaked players could be seen alighting from the Crimson Dragon flying ship and flying mounts. These players had used their black cloaks to conceal only their statistics. They did not bother covering up their appearances and guild emblems, so it was very easy to discern their identities. It seems Azure is taking its partnership with Zero Wing quite seriously. It actually sent Sinful Flame along on this expedition, Crimson Star exclaimed when she saw Sinful Flame jumping off one of the flying mounts. Sinful Flame was well known throughout the Western continent. His combat standards and combat power were extraordinary, and even in Violet Sword, one would be hard-pressed to find an expert who could match him. Normally, legendary figures like Sinful Flame would have a high degree of freedom in their guilds. Only when the guild encountered truly troublesome matters would they take action. Sure enough, Solitary Frost has come as well. If he finds out that Floating Light gained an opportunity to receive special training in the ancient secret land because of Azure's actions, he'll most likely die of envy. Wildfighter sighed when he noticed Solitary Frost among the Azure members present. Aside from the trial challenges, the ancient secret land also housed a few special locations offering incredible training environments. Only the price to enter these special locations was stupendous. Originally, out of respect for the Zeus Corporation and instructor Tori, Violet Sword had been hesitant to assign the last 2 entry slots it held. However, due to Azure's recent actions, Violet Sword's upper echelon decided to grant one of the slots to one of its young talents, Floating Light. In terms of talent, Floating Light was inferior to Solitary Frost. However, because he had received Tori's personal guidance while training inside the ancient secret land's special environment, his combat standards had undergone a qualitative transformation. Now he could partially integrate bronze combat techniques with his Tier 3 skills. Had Solitary Frost, who possessed superior talents, received the same training as well, his combat power would similarly skyrocket. At that time, Wildfighter might no longer be able to hold back when fighting him. Unfortunately, Solitary Frost missed out on this opportunity. Instructor Tori, how is the preparation of the special tools coming along? Shifeng asked as he arrived before Tori. They're all ready, Tori assured. Glancing at the group of nearly 200 players standing behind Shifeng, he asked, how many people do you wish us to send, Guild Leader Black Flame? What do you think of 30? Shifeng replied. After all was said and done, this was a partnership between Zero Wing and Violet Sword. Hence, after giving the matter some thought, he decided to have Violet Sword send 30 players to join the raid team, a number that was neither too high nor too low. With this, when the raid succeeded, Violet Sword wouldn't seem completely unrelated. The Super Guild should also have no problem dispatching this number of peak experts. 30? That's fine with us, Tori said while stroking his white beard. He then turned to Wildfighter and Crimson Star and said, afterward, you two will personally lead the team and provide your full support to Guild Leader Black Flame. Understood. Wildfighter and Crimson Star responded simultaneously. However, when Violet Sword's experts heard Tori commanding Wildfighter and Crimson Star to participate in the raid, they were baffled. In their opinion, it was already a big deal for Tori to have Vice Commander Floating Light, a domain realm expert, take part in the raid. They never thought that he would have 2 of the guild's prestigious instructors participate as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Anybody capable of becoming an instructor in Violet Sword was part of the core upper echelon of the guild. Rarely would these individuals lead a guild expedition. And if they did, the mission would normally be critical. Now, however, Tori was actually sending not 1, but 2 instructors to participate in the raid. If word of this matter spread, it would definitely cause a sensation in the guild. Alright, make the necessary preparations according to our previous arrangements, Wildfighter commanded as he looked at the team of experts standing behind him. At Wildfighter's command, 28 of the peak and apex experts present promptly went into action. Guild Leader Black Flame, please follow me. We still need to walk quite a distance to reach the secret land's entrance, Crimson Star said calmly as she approached Shifeng. Once we arrive there, I believe all the necessary items should be ready. Alright, I'll be troubling you then, Shifeng said, nodding. He then had everyone on his team follow Crimson Star into Violet Light City. Chapter 26-26. Ancient Mana. The sight of Crimson Star guiding Zero Wing's team through Violet Light City triggered discussions among the players residing in the city. Who are those people? Violet Sword's Crimson Star is actually guiding them. It's not just Crimson Star. I heard that Violet Sword's instructor Tori personally welcomed those people at the front gate just now. Amazing. Could those people be big shots of some super guild? Mythology's members grew curious when they saw Shifeng's group. Violet Sword's members, on the other hand, found this situation astonishing. Crimson Star was one of Violet Sword's Grand Elders. Even when the guild leader of an ordinary superpower visited Violet Sword, she would appear only to give a brief greeting at most. She definitely wouldn't take the initiative to guide them. Meanwhile, standing on the walls protecting the ancient castle in the heart of Violet Light City, a team of 30-plus players was quietly observing Shifeng's group. Every member of this team was a Tier 3 expert at level 113 or above. Zero Wings members are finally here, an assassin youth with 2 short swords said coldly as he eyed Shifeng with killing intent. Sandstorm, you'd better not do anything rash. They are currently Violet Sword's guests. A tall woman carrying a war hammer and a sturdy shield, standing beside the youth, warned. Relax. I know that much, Sandstorm assured as he concealed his killing intent. However, our agreement with Violet Sword is limited to the city. Once they enter the secret land, they'll be fair game. At that time, we'll get our revenge for the humiliation we suffered at the Starlight Fortress. I'm going to teach Zero Wing how foolish it is to offend our vice commander. That's for sure, the tall woman said, nodding. Although the vice commander's orders were to investigate first what Zero Wing and Violet Sword are up to inside the secret land before taking action against them, I'm sure she won't say anything about it if we just take care of Zero Wing as soon as they enter the secret land. After all, the demon god has clearly specified that if we manage to kill Black Flame even once, we'll receive a large number of contribution points and be able to train in the battlefields inside the demon god's shrine. If we bring him to the demon god, we can even receive the demon god's legacy directly. Previously, Black Flame only managed to win against us because of his fully unlocked mana body. However, he won't be as lucky this time, Sandstorm said, a smirk appearing on his face. This time he'll learn what true despair feels like. The demon god's shrine was an extraordinary training ground, which was something every superpower on the Western continent knew. However, most superpowers were still unaware that the demon god's shrine contained some legacies related to unlocking the mana body, which one could obtain only by completing one of the 10 great quests offered in the shrine. Mythology was one of the few superpowers that had managed to complete one of the 10 great quests and obtain a mana body legacy. As a result, Sandstorm and a few other members in Mythology had already fully unlocked their mana bodies. With the support of the Super Guild's special advanced battle array, their combat power had now reached a completely different level. Just their team of 30-plus players were more than capable of defeating the entirety of Netherworld Empire's Hell Legion. During the time Sandstorm and the other members of Mythology were discussing how to attack Zero Wing's group, Shifeng and the others had arrived before the ancient Secret Land's entrance, which was inside the central castle. The entrance to the Secret Land was a spatial tear leading to the otherworld where the ancient city stood. Normally, spatial tears were incredibly unstable. However, a magic array had been laid to stabilize the spatial tear, so instability was not a problem. Unfortunately, due to the ravages of time, the magic array was no longer as powerful as it was before. Now, it could grant the teleportation mark, which held the spatial coordinates of the ancient secret land, to only a maximum of 400 players that entered the spatial tear. These teleportation marks would be replenished only after the players that held these marks had left the secret land. So, this is an ancient secret land? When Shifeng arrived before the spatial tear and sensed the mana flowing from it, he was astonished. In the past, he had only heard and seen pictures of Violet Sword's ancient secret land. He had never experienced it. Now, just brushing against the excess mana flowing from the ancient secret land filled him with energy. If even the effects of the excess mana were already so potent, Shifeng found it difficult to imagine how standing inside the ancient secret land itself would feel like. For a moment he wished he could stay inside the ancient secret land forever. Guild leader Black Flame, here is your alchemy array, Crimson Star said as she handed a black cylinder to Shifeng. Make sure to use it before you enter. It will help you fend off the overly strong mana inside and prevent you from exploding from mana overload. At the same time, it will allow you to regulate the flow of your mana effectively so that you won't die from energy exhaustion. Thanks. Shifeng nodded and accepted the black cylinder from Crimson Star. He then activated the magic array on the device. A special rune appeared on his body, followed by a faint layer of light wrapped around him. Although the ancient secret land was an excellent location for training for current players, it was both a curse and a blessing. Incredibly dense mana filled the ancient secret land. The ambient mana in the secret land was so dense that players would have their mana's volume and flow rate forcibly increased to a point where they would lose control over their own mana. As a result, their energy consumption rate would increase drastically, which led to death by starvation within half an hour of entering the ancient secret land. If players wished to survive inside the ancient secret land for longer periods, They had to rely on alchemy arrays to regulate their mana. Even so, players could remain inside the ancient secret land for only 7 days. The alchemy array used was a consumable. Hence, Violet Sword was desperately trying to increase the production speed and volume of this alchemy array. Otherwise, even if they held the ancient secret land, they could only stare at it. After Shifeng and his group were all ready, Crimson Star led them into the spatial tear and disappeared from the castle. Everyone was immediately teleported to a dense forest. All around them were ancient trees towering over 100 meters. Translucent crystals adorned these trees, giving the trees and the forest a mesmerizing beauty. The mana inside the forest was also so dense that it had condensed into white mist. However, despite the white mist, everyone's vision remained unaffected. During the time everyone was enjoying the scenery around them, a roar suddenly came from a distance and echoed throughout the forest. Upon turning toward the origin of the roar, everyone quickly noticed a 200-meter-tall one-horned bear fighting an equally tall six-eyed ape. Every one of the two beasts' actions shook the entire forest and deformed the terrain around the monsters. Damn it! Why are two region chiefs fighting each other? Crimson Star frowned as she watched the battle of the two giant behemoths. The ancient secret land was an incredibly dangerous place. Not only were there plenty of monsters here, but each region in the secret land would have a powerful boss ruling over it. Violet Sword and Mythology had labeled these bosses region chiefs. The weakest among these region chiefs was already a level 120 mythic monster with combat standards at the Trial Tower's 6th floor. In addition, all monsters found within the ancient secret land had incredibly powerful bodies. Even an ordinary level 120 mythic monster here could rival a level 120 mythic ranked archaic species found in the outside world. Normally, both Violet Swords and Mythology's members would do their best to avoid these region chiefs when visiting the ancient secret land. The reason for this wasn't just the high casualty rate incidental to challenging these region chiefs. There was also the fact that fights with these region chiefs would attract the attention of nearby monsters. Players that fought a region chief would end up having to fight a continuously increasing number of monsters and eventually suffer annihilation. Two region chiefs appearing in this location could be considered to be the worst-case scenario. In the outside world, there were indeed instances where players could take advantage of monsters fighting each other. However, the monsters inside the ancient secret land were incredibly smart. So long as they sensed the presence of players, they would promptly stop fighting each other and cooperate to kill the intruding players first before resuming their fight. They wouldn't give players any opportunities to take advantage of it all. Why is our luck so horrid? We actually came across two region chiefs having a territorial battle. Sandstorm, who was currently hidden on a tree some distance away from Shifeng's group, complained in frustration when he saw the two fighting behemoths straying closer to his team's position. Alright, forget about Zero Wing for now. We need to leave this place quickly. We'll be doomed if those two region chiefs discover us, the tall female guardian knight standing beside Sandstorm said. I know, Sandstorm said, gritting his teeth as he shot a glare at the distant Shifeng. As Sandstorm's group was preparing to leave the area, Crimson Star also had everyone on the team prepare for a hasty retreat. Guild leader Black Flame, we need to leave this area fast. We'll be in trouble if we stay here any longer, Crimson Star said hurriedly as she looked at Shifeng, who was still quietly observing the two battling region chiefs. Shouldn't that way be the shortest path to the ancient city? Shifeng asked as he pointed toward the two behemoths. If we circle around them, wouldn't we need to waste half a day? That is indeed the shortest path to the ancient city, but if we get caught by those two region chiefs instead of wasting half a day, all of us will end up dying here. Crimson Star snapped in exasperation when she heard that Shifeng was actually still planning to take this route to the ancient city. However, she also understood Shifeng's thoughts. They could stay inside the ancient secret land for only 7 days. If they wasted half a day on a detour, they would be under much greater pressure when raiding the hero trial. After all, with how many monsters there were inside the trial, they would need 5 or 6 days just to reach the trial boss. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Moreover, the two region chiefs were mythic bosses. In the outside world, coming across two mythic bosses would be akin to hitting the jackpot. However, they were currently inside the ancient secret land, facing monsters far stronger than those in the outside world. Challenging two mythic bosses simultaneously would simply be suicide. Otherwise, Violet Sword wouldn't have to be so careful when exploring the ancient secret land. Guild leader Black Flame, let's leave. If we don't go now, we'll enter the perception range of those two region chiefs, Wildfighter advised urgently. Our main goal is to clear the trial. We don't need to fight those two region chiefs. I guess you're right. We don't need to fight those two, Shifeng said, nodding. He then turned to look at Crimson Star and Wildfighter and added, I'll lure them away. Use this opportunity to sneak past them. After saying so, Shifeng dashed straight for the two behemoths. Chapter 26-27. Shifeng soared. Upon seeing Shifeng charging toward the two distant behemoths, Crimson Star and Wildfighter turned pale. He's insane. Crimson Star cursed when she saw that Shifeng had already gotten over 100 yards away. Immediately she turned to the rest of the team and ordered, Everyone retreat together with floating light. Do not stop for anything. Retreat to Violet Light City. Wildfighter, hold the rear with me. Got it. Wildfighter responded and unsheathed his weapon, a solemn expression appearing on his face. In this situation, Violet Sword's members could not help growing nervous. As for Sandstorm and the other members of Mythology spectating from a distance, their eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when they saw Shifeng's actions. That crazy Black Flame. He's actually charging to the two region chiefs. Sandstorm cursed. Then he commanded hastily, Hurry. Retreat quickly. As soon as Sandstorm finished speaking, Mythology's members, who had been preparing to retreat from the area already, picked up their pace with serious expressions. Black Flame truly is insane. He's actually planning to drag everyone down with him. Did Violet Sword's people not warn him about the region chiefs here? The tall, female guardian knight grumbled, similarly cursing at Shifeng as she jumped down from the tree she had been standing on. The region chiefs of the ancient secret land were considerably stronger than mythic monsters found in the outside world. In terms of strength and speed, they were at least 30% better. Trying to take on just one of these region chiefs with a 200-man Tier 3 team was already an incredibly difficult task, incurring plenty of casualties. When coupled with the endless stream of other monsters that would continuously join in on the battle, any team that tried to challenge a region chief was doomed. However, what made the ancient secret lands region chiefs truly difficult to deal with wasn't their physical prowess but their massive perception range. When these region chiefs fought players, they could manipulate all the mana within a 5,000-yard radius, relying on this mana to detect all movements within range. One could say that so long as there were players within a region chief's passive perception range of 500 yards or players fighting a region chief, then all players within a 5,000-yard radius of the region chief would become its targets. If players failed to kill the aggravated region chief, then they wouldn't be able to shake off its pursuit. This was also the reason why Mythology and Violet Sword had labeled the mythic bosses in the ancient secret land region chiefs. Normally, teams that accidentally came across a region chief were still fine. The majority of the team's members had a chance to escape with their lives. However, only annihilation awaited teams that came across two region chiefs simultaneously. Even before the female guardian knight finished speaking, Mythology's members had already turned tail and run. However, after everyone had taken just a few strides, the mana around them suddenly stirred. At the same time, they felt as if a pair of eyes were looking down on them. Obviously, the two region chiefs had already locked onto their life auras. Damn it! Everyone split up and retreat. Every survivor counts. Sandstorm yelled. When he looked at Shifeng's distant figure, he felt himself going crazy. For a moment, he even suspected that Shifeng had deliberately provoked the two region chiefs. Meanwhile, when Crimson Star and the others saw the two region chiefs suddenly stop fighting and rapidly head in their direction, their complexions darkened. They could not put a 5,000-yard distance between themselves and the two bosses. They had no hope of escaping the battle at all. 5,000-yard distance. Even Tier 3 experts like themselves would still take quite some time to cover 5,000 yards. To make matters worse, tools were ineffective inside the ancient secret land, so they couldn't teleport away or accelerate their retreat from the battlefield. Crazy bastard. He's going to get us all killed. Floating Light, who was already retreating, cursed when he felt the two region chiefs locking on to his life aura. Although players wouldn't lose an entire level from dying inside the ancient secret land, the amount of EXP lost was still not a trivial matter. After all, at their level just leveling up once took a lot of time. Hence, even a small percentage of their EXP equaled 1 or 2 days' worth of hard work. As Floating Light was leading the retreat of Violet Sword's members, he suddenly noticed something. Zero Wings and Azure's members were actually still standing in their original positions. It was as if they had not heard Crimson Star's orders at all. What are they doing? Are they planning to die with Black Flame? Floating Light was baffled as he looked at Solitary Frost and Xianxia. Setting the others aside, it was incredibly strange for Solitary Frost and Xianxia to defy Crimson Star. After all, the two of them were geniuses that had trained under Crimson Star during their sojourn at Violet Sword. The two of them knew very clearly how powerful and capable Crimson Star was. Crimson Star's calling for a retreat showed just how dangerous their current situation was. Yet Solitary Frost and Xianxia had actually disobeyed her command and remained where they were. Moreover, they wore indescribably calm expressions, their reactions making it seem as if nothing was happening. Vice Commander, let's quickly retreat. This is Zero Wing and Azure's matter. Instructor Crimson Star and Instructor Wildfighter won't be able to hold off those two region chiefs for very long, a retreating Tier 3 assassin urged hurriedly when he noticed Floating Light pause. I guess you're right, Floating Light said, nodding before resuming his retreat. At the same time he could not help glancing at Solitary Frost and Xianxia with pity. Originally, with Solitary Frost's and Xianxia's talents, they should have been able to shine brightly in God's domain. However, their futures were now ruined because they belonged to a guild like the Azure Chamber of Commerce and followed an unreliable team leader like Shifeng. However, Floating Light had just taken a few steps forward when the deafening roar of a bear came from behind him and echoed throughout the forest, causing it to tremble. Immediately afterward, a beam of mana shot past the area beside Floating Light's group, leaving behind a massive trench on the ground it passed through. Seen from afar, the ground looked like pudding that a spoon had scraped. The fight started? Floating Light's complexion further darkened as he took in the massive trench a short distance away. This was the power of the ancient Secret Land's mythic monsters. Any random attack of theirs could transform the terrain around them. Let alone one person, even a 100-man Tier 3 expert team would be cannon fodder in front of these region chiefs. If one really wished to take on a region chief, they would need a 200-man team of Tier 3 peak experts at the very minimum. Moreover, the team would need 2 or 3 domain realm MTs working together to tank the region chief. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to stop the boss's attacks adequately. In fact, even a single mistake might result in a team wipe. After Floating Light's group ran for another 50 yards or so, a lightning bolt suddenly shot past them some distance away, followed by the ear-splitting crack of thunder. As the thunder faded, the sky above them darkened abruptly. In the next moment, the 200-meter-tall six-eyed gorilla went flying overhead and crashed heavily into the ground a few hundred yards ahead of them, the ground shattering at the impact. As for the giant gorilla, it stumbled quite a bit as it landed and very nearly lost its footing. After stabilizing itself, the gorilla glared into the distance before releasing a deafening roar. It then charged forward, completely ignoring Floating Light and the other members of Violet Sword, who stood only a short distance away from it. What is going on? Floating Light was confounded by this situation. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Violet Sword's other peak experts similarly could not help rubbing their eyes, thinking that they were hallucinating. However, no matter how much they rubbed, the several massive craters the six-eyed gorilla's feet left behind did not disappear. Before Floating Light and the others could react to this unexpected development, though, another deafening boom and the snapping of trees entered their ears. However, these sounds came from quite a distance away. There should still be some separation between the origin of these sounds and the six-eyed gorilla that had just charged past them. Floating Light and the others turn around reflexively, looking for the origin of these sounds. They spotted a cloaked man wielding 2 long swords standing atop a tree. Meanwhile, some distance away from this swordsman was a gigantic bear that had just steadied itself, glaring hatefully at him. The six-eyed gorilla was also stalking toward this man, seemingly searching for an opportunity to strike at him. However, Floating Light and the others could also see a hint of fear in the one-horned bear's and six-eyed gorilla's eyes. It was clear that the two region chiefs were afraid of the tiny human on the tree. Chapter 26-28. Suppressing the region chiefs Floating Light and the other members of Violet Light gaped in shock at the man standing atop the gigantic tree that was over 100 meters tall. Just how high is his strength? Those were two level 120+ region chiefs. Either of those region chiefs could wipe out a 200-man Tier 3 team of peak experts. Facing both region chiefs, even a team of such caliber was sure to get annihilated. At this moment, however, Shifeng had single-handedly suppressed and even repelled the two region chiefs. This was simply unbelievable. Is this why they didn't retreat before? When Floating Light looked at the two region chiefs warily eyeing Shifeng and thought back to the fact that Solitary Frost and Zhou Xian had not moved even after Crimson Star gave the command to retreat, realization immediately dawned upon him. With such a monstrous team leader, there was indeed no need to retreat. At this moment, Floating Light and the other retreating members of Violet Sword weren't the only ones shocked by this situation. Crimson Star and Wildfighter, who were planning to hold the rear, as well as the frantically retreating members of Mythology, nearly had their eyes fall out of their sockets when this incredible scene played out before them. What did he do during this period? How did he raise his strength attribute to such an extent? Sandstorm's heart roiled with shock as he stared at Shifeng. During the fight at the Starlight Fortress, the strength Shifeng displayed was just close to reaching the Tier 4 standard. Moreover, he had relied on his fully unlocked mana body to do so. However, just how long had passed since that fight? In Sandstorm's opinion, even if Shifeng were incredibly lucky and obtained one or two pieces of epic equipment or gained some special encounters, he would be fortunate to match the strength of Tier 4 mythic monsters of the same level. At this moment, however, Shifeng's strength had actually grown to a level where he could overwhelm even the region chiefs of the ancient secret land. However, before anyone could snap out of their stupor, the two region chiefs took action once more. Firstly, the one-horned bear let loose an angry roar before slamming its front paws into the ground and shattering it. A twofold magic array then formed beneath Shifeng's feet, covering a 300-yard radius. Immediately afterward, thick stone walls emerged, bordering the magic array and enveloping Shifeng completely. Tier 4 spell Earth's Embrace. As the one-horned bear was taking action, the six-eyed gorilla leaped into the sky above Shifeng. The gorilla then summoned a crimson magic array with a 400-yard radius above the swordsman. Tier 4 spell Fire Dragon's Descent. In the next moment, a fire dragon larger than the six-eyed gorilla and made entirely out of flames emerged from the magic array. It spread its wings as it descended toward Shifeng. Those two region chiefs actually know how to coordinate their spells? Crap. That's cheating. Shouldn't mythic bosses be upright and use spells in turns? Everyone was stunned when they saw the two region chiefs' coordinated assault. Coordinating skills and spells was an extremely common thing for players. However, this was the first time they had seen monsters, particularly Tier 4 bosses, do so. Hence, everyone could not help despairing at the sight. 4 Tier 3 players like themselves, just one Tier 4 spell was already plenty difficult to deal with. If not handled appropriately, the result would very likely be an instant team wipe. If they had to go up against two coordinated Tier 4 spells, even Tier 3 MTs with their life-saving skills activated would be killed instantly, unless they had invulnerability skills or spells. It's really over this time. Crimson Star shook her head and sighed when she saw the two coordinated Tier 4 spells. If it were her, she could defend against one Tier 4 spell using a Tier 3 curse. However, even she would be powerless against two Tier 4 AoE spells. This didn't mean that she had just one Tier 3 curse in her arsenal of spells. In fact, she had several. Currently, however, it was simply impossible for her, and most likely all magical class players in God's domain, to double cast two Tier 3 curses. Haha. So what if you have amazing strength? Let's see how you deal with this. Sandstorm burst out in laughter when he saw the two region chiefs' coordinated assault on Shifeng. The swordsman's strength had indeed exceeded his expectations. In fact, he felt powerless when he witnessed Shifeng's fearsome display, and it was definitely impossible for them to exact revenge on him this time. However, being able to see the two region chiefs killing Shifeng now wasn't a bad outcome either. After all, he knew that because of the demon god's curse, the swordsman would suffer triple the death penalty every time he died. Although they were currently inside the ancient secret land where the death penalty was not as stringent as that in the outside world, a triple death penalty would still deal Shifeng a heavy blow. However, while everyone was looking at the gigantic fire dragon descending toward Shifeng, the swordsman surprisingly maintained his composure. Moreover, aside from Shifeng, the spectating members of Zero Wing and Azure also remained indescribably calm in this situation. Finally, a chance. Solitary Frost muttered as he watched Shifeng closely, his eyes glittering with joy and excitement. At this moment, aside from Solitary Frost, everyone else from the Azure Chamber of Commerce also had excited expressions. What's wrong with them? Floating Light was perplexed as he looked at Solitary Frost and the others. Shifeng was about to die here, yet Solitary Frost and the others were actually feeling excited about it? Come. While Floating Light was fraught with confusion, Shifeng made his move. In the next moment, Shifeng sheathed Killing Ray and held the abyssal blade with both hands. He then jumped up from the treetop, propelling himself straight toward the descending fire dragon. He's going to resist the attack head-on? Floating Light could not help but disapprove of Shifeng's decision when he saw the swordsman heading for the fire dragon. A Tier 4 spell could exhibit much greater power than a mythic monster could with its physical body. This was especially true in the ancient Secret Lands environment. Due to the abundant mana here, skills and spells would exhibit much greater power than they normally could in the outside world. A Tier 4 spell cast by a mythic monster could instantly kill a Tier 3 metric tons who had a life-saving skill activated. Just as Shifeng was about to collide with the fire dragon, he suddenly raised the abyssal blade overhead and swung it at the fire dragon. Shatter! The phantom of a gigantic greatsword suddenly appeared in the sky, creating a pitch-black wall there as it slashed toward the descending fire dragon. First Sword Light Shadow. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. In the next moment, the pitch-black wall not only bisected the fire dragon but also continued extending toward the six-eyed gorilla hovering over 100 yards above the fire dragon. Upon seeing the approach of the pitch-black wall, the six-eyed gorilla panicked and instinctively tried to flee the area. However, the pitch-black wall extended far too rapidly. Even though the six-eyed gorilla flew as fast as it could, it still failed to outmaneuver the pitch-black wall and ended up getting one of its arms cut off. The six-eyed gorilla let loose an agonized shriek that echoed throughout the forest at the grievous injury. Shortly afterward, an arm the size of a mountain fell into the forest below. A massive crater formed around the arm from the force of the impact. As for the six-eyed gorilla, it plummeted to the ground and tumbled helplessly for some distance. Due to the loss of its arm, the gorilla's combat power also decreased significantly. Chapter 26-29, Ancient Secret Lands Power. How is this possible? That's a mythic monster we're talking about. How could a Tier 3 player like him break through its defensive threshold? Crimson Star and Wildfighter could not believe their eyes as they watched the tumbling six-eyed gorilla. Not only had Shifeng shattered a Tier 4 spell with a single move, but he had even used the same move to injure the six-eyed gorilla severely. On paper, the gorilla had only lost around 500,000 HP from the attack, which was nothing compared to its 2 billion HP, but in reality his attack had caused far more damage than that. There were two general types of attacks in God's domain. The first type reduced the HP of the target, while the other weakened the target's defenses. In the case of the former, if the target's HP fell to 0, then they would die. In the case of the latter, if the target had its defenses destroyed, then its physical body would suffer damage, which would, in turn, reduce the target's combat power as well as the difficulty of killing said target. Only, it was incredibly difficult for players to execute attacks capable of destroying a monster's defenses, particularly those of high-ranking monsters, as the stronger a monster was, the higher its defensive threshold would be. Normally, players couldn't destroy the defenses of a monster of the same tier, much less those of a higher tier. The best players could do against higher-tiered monsters was cause minor injuries and continuously stack these minor injuries to reduce the monster's combat power. Against the six-eyed gorilla, only an attack carrying power at the peak Tier 4 standard had a chance of overwhelming its defensive threshold. However, despite being a Tier 3 player, Shifeng had actually managed this feat without resorting to external tools. This was inconceivable. Meanwhile, when Sandstorm and the other members of Mythology saw this scene, they too gaped in shock. Can he still be considered a player? There were no words to describe the shock Sandstorm felt as he gazed at Shifeng right now. In the eyes of ordinary players, having the ability to surpass a monster's defensive threshold only meant that they could reduce the combat power of the target monster. However, for peak experts and apex experts who frequently fought high-tiered monsters, having such an ability held an entirely different meaning. For peak experts and apex experts, having such an ability meant that they could solo kill monsters. The monsters in God's domain were born with high HP and defense, particularly HP. Even if players could inflict over 1,000,000 damage with their attacks, this amount of damage was nothing for high-tiered monsters like mythic monsters. Such damage wouldn't overcome the monster's battle recovery. An army of players was necessary to kill high-tiered monsters. Hence, in God's domain, it was common knowledge that even if a player's raw power surpassed that of high-tiered monsters, solo killing these monsters would still be impossible, especially Grand Lords or higher-ranked monsters. This held true even for current Tier 3 players. However, there was one method that players could use to defeat such high-tiered monsters: executing attacks surpassing the target monster's defensive threshold. Attacks that surpassed a monster's defensive threshold could inflict severe injuries on the monster's physical body. Moreover, after injuring a monster up to a certain point, aside from reducing the monster's combat power, players could also force monsters into a weakened state, which would drastically reduce their defense and maximum HP. If players managed to corner a monster to the point where it entered a heavily weakened state, they could even impose the HP loss debuff on the target monster and thoroughly nullify the monster's battle recovery. If a monster lost its battle recovery, which was also its strongest ability, solo killing it would no longer be impossible. With sufficient stamina and concentration, players could slowly but surely grind the monster to death. Now that Shifeng was capable of surpassing the six-eyed gorilla's defensive threshold, this meant that Shifeng could solo kill it. Meanwhile, a player having the ability to solo kill a Tier 4 mythic monster was simply unheard of in God's domain. At this moment, however, let alone the spectating players, even Shifeng himself found this situation astonishing. Why did Light Shadow's destructive power increase by so much? Shifeng was confused as he looked at the six-eyed gorilla's severed arm. Judging by the damage to its HP, my attack's raw power should still be far from the peak Tier 4 standard. Light Shadow should be just slightly stronger than a Tier 4 spell, yet the actual destruction it caused is no different from that of a peak Tier 4 attack. Could this be due to the ancient Secret Lands environment? Meanwhile, as Shifeng was analyzing the situation, the one-horned bear rushed toward him. The bear's gigantic frame made it seem as if a small mountain was charging at him. In fact, there was even the vague image of a mountain overlapping with the one-horned bear's figure. Tier 4 skill Crumbling Mountain. The AoE of the one-horned bear's attack covered a 50-yard radius. Shifeng responded by raising the abyssal blade above his head once more. Light Shadow. When using Light Shadow this time, however, Shifeng placed the majority of his focus on perceiving the mana around himself. He wanted to see just what was enabling his mana technique to exhibit such immense power. When Shifeng started swinging the abyssal blade, another pitch-black wall formed on the battlefield, shattered the Phantom Mountain, and subsequently landed on the one-horned bear's left shoulder. Roar! When the pitch-black wall cut into the one-horned bear's shoulder, the bear let loose an agonized howl. Its HP also instantly fell by more than 620,000. Although Shifeng's attack this time did not sever the one-horned bear's left arm, it prevented the bear from freely moving its injured arm. Now the bear could rely on only its two legs and one arm to stabilize itself. After suffering this grievous injury, the one-horned bear continuously growled at Shifeng angrily. However, fear was also clear in the bear's eyes. Upon seeing this scene, Floating Light and those of Violet Sword who were retreating were dumbfounded once more. How is this possible? That move just now wasn't a skill. Floating Light felt as if his worldview had been refreshed when he saw the one-horned bear daunted by Shifeng. In Floating Light's opinion, the attack Shifeng used to injure the six-eyed gorilla heavily should be a special skill. Otherwise, there was no way the attack could be so powerful. However, only 2 or 3 seconds after Shifeng retaliated against the six-eyed gorilla, the swordsman was using the same move against the one-horned bear. There was no way such a powerful skill could have such a brief cooldown. The only explanation for this situation was that Shifeng wasn't using a skill or spell, but a special technique instead. By simply relying on a special technique, Feng was actually capable of heavily injuring mythic monsters. Moreover, these mythic monsters were even the ancient Secret Lands region chiefs. Nobody would believe Floating Light if he told this tale to others. After repelling the one-horned bear, Feng himself was stunned as well. So this is the reason why the ancient Secret Land can help players reach Tier 4? Feng thought as he looked at the closing spatial tear before him. In God's domain, the greatest difference separating Tier 3 and Tier 4 players wasn't the difference in physique, but the degree of control they had over mana and their application of it. To be precise, it was the degree of control over and application of ambient mana. Controlling and utilizing ambient mana might be something players had started doing since the start of the game, but the standard at which Tier 0 players did it was only at the most basic level. Their efficiency in utilizing mana was extremely low. Hence, players needed to rely on the mana of their fully unlocked mana bodies to guide and utilize the ambient mana for their own use. To put it simply, players had to rely on their own mana bodies to integrate and convert ambient mana into their own mana. By doing so, one would be able to maximize the power they could exhibit with their mana. However, integrating ambient mana was a challenge. Without guidelines or legacies in the outside world to teach players how to accomplish this, players could only rely on themselves to learn how to do so. However, while carefully observing the second light shadow he executed, Feng noticed something peculiar about the mana around him. The ancient Secret Land's ambient mana had actually taken the initiative to integrate itself with his mana. This development had drastically increased the amount of ambient mana he could manipulate and, in turn, boosted the power of light shadow significantly. However, as he wasn't actively executing this mana integration, his mana usage efficiency was still very low. The additional ambient mana he managed to manipulate had increased only light shadow's destructive power, not the mana technique's strength. This was akin to putting an edge on a weapon. While he might have increased the weapon's destructive power, the weapon itself remained unchanged. Even so, this was an incredibly precious situation. After all, there was almost no information available in the outside world that could help players achieve mana integration. Now that the mana here was actively integrating itself with his mana, he could gain some hints on how to do so and increase his learning efficiency. Following which, Feng stopped dwelling on this matter. Instead, he executed Light Shadow 2 more times to chop off one leg each from the one-horned bear and six-eyed gorilla. The mobility of these 2 region chiefs has already been greatly reduced. Let's go. Feng said as he turned to Crimson Star and Wild Fighter, who were still in a daze. After saying so, Feng promptly ran toward the ancient city, ignoring the 2 region chiefs. He got through just like that? Crimson Star and Wild Fighter were at a loss for words when they goggled at the 2 region chiefs, which were warily watching Feng leave without making a move. They were currently inside the extremely dangerous ancient Secret Land, and their opponents were even 2 region chiefs, and yet, read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, Crimson Star and Wild Fighter did not linger over this topic for long. They quickly instructed everyone else on the team to ignore the 2 region chiefs and follow Feng. Now that the 2 region chiefs had each lost a leg, their mobility was greatly impeded compared to before. It would be almost impossible for them to catch up with Tier 3 players running at full speed. The team could easily escape the 2 region chiefs' perception range before they fully recovered. Team leader, are we still chasing them? A Tier 3 ranger from mythology asked Sandstorm when he saw Feng's team leaving. Of course we are. Sandstorm said as he glared at the Tier 3 ranger. Gritting his teeth, he said, I admit that Black Flame's combat power is at inhuman levels, but he is only one person. Even if we can't kill Black Flame, I refuse to believe that we can't handle the other players on his team. So long as we get rid of everyone else, Black Flame's plans here will be ruined. After saying so, Sandstorm started chasing Feng's team, together with the other 30+ members of mythology. Chapter 26:30 Tier 4 Divine. Well, while the ancient Secret Land might be known as a secret land, it was several times larger than a large-scale map in the outside world, essentially a miniature world. Even though Feng and the others were Tier 3 players, since they were prohibited from using mounts, they ended up running for more than half a day to reach a majestic city in the middle of a canyon. The city in question had several layers of magic barriers as defense. Through the translucent barriers, one could see multiple magic towers and buildings several hundred meters tall. There were even floating buildings that could not be found in any of the kingdoms and empires on the main continent. The city was far more developed than even the capitals of kingdoms and empires. Shi Feng was shocked when he laid eyes on this majestic ancient city for the first time. Even while standing several thousand yards away from the city, he could already feel a frightening pressure constantly bearing down on his body, making his body indescribably heavy. If Tier 2 players were subjected to this pressure, they wouldn't be able to approach the city at all. Be careful of those statues erected behind the city walls. Although there are magic arrays suppressing the power of those statues, if you look at them for too long, you'll fall into a mentally weakened state, Crimson Star warned the curious crowd behind her. If that happens, you'll need 4 or 5 days to recover. Let alone challenging the trial, you might not even have enough time to make it out of the secret land. Those statues will cause players to fall into a mentally weakened state. Upon hearing Crimson Star's words, Shi Feng could not help taking a closer look at the stone statues enveloped by magic arrays. As soon as he did so, he felt a frightening spiritual pressure invading his mind. At the same time, the figure of an ancient being appeared briefly before his mind's eye. Shi Feng's heart palpitated from this mental pressure. Fortunately, his mind was able to resist it, if just barely. Tier 4 Divine Will? Shi Feng was somewhat surprised at the mental pressure the statues were exuding. No wonder Violet Sword was able to produce so many Tier 4 experts back then. At this point, ancient gods had long since withdrawn from the main continent of God's domain. Now it was incredibly difficult to meet even demigods there. However, before disappearing, many ancient gods had left behind legacies in dangerous locations. Meanwhile, these legacy locations generally possessed divine will. On the surface, the divine wills in these legacy locations function to inflict powerful mental pressure on trespassers and deter casual approach or observation of the legacy locations. However, divine will also had a very useful function for players: the tempering of concentration. In God's domain, players' stamina and concentration were considered hidden attributes and were incredibly difficult to raise. This was especially true for the concentration attribute. Aside from tier promotions, there were no clear methods that players could use to raise their concentration. Originally, concentration was an attribute few players paid attention to, as they would generally run out of stamina before they would concentration. However, as more and more players started learning combat techniques, everyone finally understood the importance of concentration. With stronger concentration, not only could players afford to execute many more combat techniques, but they could also reduce the stamina and concentration consumption of combat techniques. Most importantly, powerful combat techniques required sufficiently high concentration. Unfortunately, there weren't many known methods that players could use to reliably increase their concentration. Generally, players could only rely on raising their tiers or improving their brain activity to do so. However, as more and more experts came into contact with ancient locations and divine will, they had discovered an astonishing matter. Divine will could actually be used to raise the maximum limit of players' concentration. Although the improvements were small, players would eventually receive an impressive boost to their concentration over time. However, divine will wasn't something that easily found. Moreover, divine will couldn't improve a player's concentration in perpetuity. The improvements players could receive from the divine will would differ depending on its strength. If players already possessed very powerful concentration, certain divine wills might not even be effective on them. Meanwhile, the statues erected within the ancient city contain divine will capable of tempering players' concentration up to the Tier 4 standard. Hence, Shi Feng had referred to it as Tier 4 divine will. If a Tier 3 player could elevate their concentration to the Tier 4 standard, it would be of tremendous help when challenging the Tier 4 promotion quest. With stronger concentration, players could better control their body strength and mana. They would be able to exhibit much greater potential than they used to. However, due to the magic arrays enveloping those statues, the divine will the statues emitted was heavily suppressed. While this weakened divine will might be effective on ordinary Tier 3 players, it would be almost no help to Tier 3 peak experts. Tier 3 peak experts that tried to temper themselves using this divine will would only exhaust their concentration to no avail. Guild Leader Black Flame, ahead of us is the entrance to the trial grounds, Crimson Star said as she pointed at a gigantic gate nearby. As we are challenging the hero trial, we have only one opportunity. If we team wipe inside, we won't be able to enter the trial grounds anymore. However, so long as we have even one person alive, even if everyone else on the team dies, we can still enter the trial grounds after getting automatically resurrected outside. Only, the resurrection period within the ancient secret land is very long. 1 full day, so everyone needs to be careful while inside. It might be fine if they were challenging the normal trial, but they had only one opportunity to challenge the hero trial. If the players on their team kept dying, they definitely wouldn't be able to clear the hero trial before the effects of their alchemy arrays ran out. Hence, when challenging the hero trial, controlling the casualty rate was crucial. This was also the reason why she wanted to avoid the region chiefs. Had their team gotten annihilated by the 2 region chiefs back then, they would have had to wait 1 full day before they could head to the trial grounds. I understand, Shifeng said, nodding. Since Shifeng already understood her intentions, Crimson Star did not say anything more. After all, experts of Shifeng's caliber generally needed only small reminders to know what they should do. Following which, Crimson Star, Wildfighter and several other Violet Sword members approached the 10-meter-tall teleportation gate. Each of them then took out an ink-black crystal from their bags and started chanting an incantation. As soon as these dozen or so players started chanting, the divine runes engraved on the teleportation gate lit up and drew the ambient mana toward the teleportation gate. While Crimson Star and the others were activating the hero trial, Sandstorm and Mythology's other members were quietly observing the situation from behind a pile of shattered rocks 500 yards away. The hero trial, the female guardian knight standing beside Sandstorm exclaimed in surprise when she identified the divine runes lighting up on the teleportation gate. Violet Sword actually plans to challenge the hero trial now. Are they insane? She had experienced the ancient city's trials herself. While she didn't know what the hero trial was like, she knew that even the elite trial was not something current players could hope to conquer. If not for their previous raid team having plenty of advanced battle arrays, they wouldn't have made it to the trial boss's feet. As for the more difficult hero trial, that was something even the current mythology didn't dare dream of challenging. The hero trial? When Sandstorm saw Crimson Star's group activating the hero trial, a wide smile bloomed on his face. Good. Wonderful. Although I don't know what gave Violet Swords and Zero Wings people the courage to challenge the hero trial, this is our chance. Since Crimson Star and Wildfighter are personally activating the hero trial, they can't stop midway without wasting their one chance. This is the perfect time for us to take action. But dealing with Black Flame won't be easy, the female guardian knight argued worriedly as she eyed Shifeng, who was standing beside the teleportation gate. With him around, it'll be difficult for us to gain any advantage. Relax. The vice commander prepared a trump card for our operation this time, Sandstorm said, grinning. He then took out several gleaming gemstones from his bag. These are Tier 3 magic devouring gemstones, which the vice commander obtained from the demon god's shrine. If we equip them on level 100 dark gold weapons or above, we can sacrifice the weapon and the gemstone to gain Tier 4 power for a short period. This item isn't subject to any restrictions inside the ancient secret land. The vice commander gave me 5 of these as a precaution. So long as we 5 team leaders use this gemstone, we'll have 5 Tier 4 combatants on our side. Including the HP and defense we'll gain from the advanced battle array, we should be able to pin down Black Flame with just 3 people. The remaining 2 team leaders will lead the rest to slaughter Violet Swords and Zero Wings members. All their efforts will go down the drain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If you had such treasures on you, why didn't you take them out earlier? The female guardian knight grumbled as she rolled her eyes at Sandstorm. Previously, the task their vice commander gave them was for them to spoil Violet Sword's plan, as well as kill Shifeng if possible. With the magic devouring gemstones, while they might not be capable of killing Shifeng, spoiling Violet Sword's plan would be child's play. After all, players that died in the ancient secret land needed to wait 1 full day to get resurrected. If they could kill a significant number of Violet Swords and Zero Wings members, the 2 guilds would waste 1 day of the alchemy array's operational time, which would, in turn, drastically reduce the 2 guilds' odds of clearing the hero trial. And if they could interrupt the activation of the teleportation gate, they would thoroughly shatter Violet Sword's plan of raiding the hero trial. All right, 1 for each of you, Sandstorm said as he distributed the magic devouring gemstones to the 4 other team leaders on the team. He then looked toward Shifeng and said, It's time we let Black Flame know how foolish it is to offend mythology. Chapter 26:31 Yen Xiaoqian taking action? As Crimson Star and the others chanted their incantation, a spatial tunnel gradually opened in the teleportation gate. The moment the spatial tunnel appeared, everyone present felt an ancient aura spilling out from it as if a dragon from the abyss had just awakened. An unprecedented pressure bore down on their bodies. So this is the hero trial? Shifeng was inwardly astonished when he felt the pressure on his body. The strength of this aura practically rivals that of a demigod. Even Tier 3 experts will most likely have difficulty exhibiting combat power at the Tier 2 standard while inside. While the pressure an aura subjected players to was not fatal, it would affect their combat power. At this moment, the aura leaking out of the spatial passage was so powerful that it made even Shifeng feel very uncomfortable. If other Tier 3 players were to fight while subjected to this aura, their combat power would definitely suffer. There are still 40 seconds left until the teleportation gate is fully activated. A mana shockwave will occur when that happens. Floating light, start constructing a barrier. Crimson Star said through the team chat when she saw the spatial passage stabilizing. Understood. Upon hearing Crimson Star's command, Floating Light promptly ordered Violet Sword's Tier 3 magical classes to construct a Tier 3 defensive barrier. While a mana shockwave wouldn't cause direct damage, players that got hit by one would have their control over and perception of mana weakened significantly for a certain period. Players might even lose the ability to use skills and spells during this time. On Violet Sword's first attempt at the normal trial, the raid team dispatched had failed to take this mana shockwave into account. As a result, the raid team had suffered from a runaway mana state for one whole day. However, as Violet Sword's members were constructing the defensive barrier, a low shout came from a distance. A chance. Everyone, interrupt the teleportation gate's activation. Sandstorm commanded when he saw Floating Light and the magical class players of Violet Sword constructing a magic barrier. Immediately, several figures charged toward Crimson Star's group with flying speeds. The Silver Light Legion? Crimson Star immediately recognized Sandstorm's group when she saw them, her complexion darkening slightly. Sandstorm. Is mythology trying to break the agreement? If their team had come across Sandstorm's group under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have paid mythology's members any attention at all. However, Violet Sword's peak experts were currently occupied with activating the teleportation gate and defending against the resulting mana shockwave. They barely had any manpower available to repulse Sandstorm's group. Meanwhile, Sandstorm's team consisted of Void Realm experts or better. If these people attacked now, the consequences would be unimaginable. Moreover, Sandstorm and the others had their advanced battle arrays activated, which boosted their basic attributes far beyond those of ordinary Tier 3 players. Agreement. Sandstorm laughed at Crimson Star's words. I don't recall mythology making any agreements with Violet Sword regarding what happens inside the ancient secret land. Besides, if you have to blame someone, blame yourselves for not knowing what's good for you. Since you dare to partner with Zero Wing, then die with it. Sandstorm's team accelerated. Damn it. They're actually taking action. Crimson Star turned to Floating Light and said, Light, coordinate with Guild Leader Black Flame's group and buy us time. If the teleportation gate's activation is interrupted, we'll lose our chance to challenge the hero trial. Understood. Floating Light nodded in response. He then faced Sandstorm's team with a solemn expression. Although their side had an absolute advantage in numbers and they even had the help of a monster like Shifeng, the number of combat-ready peak experts they had was far from comparable. Not to mention Sandstorm and a few other individuals on his team had an advanced battle array which granted them a huge increase in basic attributes. If they allowed Sandstorm's team to break through and interrupt Crimson Star's group, then all their preparations for the hero trial would be for naught. You need to be careful. I don't know why, but Sandstorm and his fellow team leaders are actually giving off a pressure like a mythic monsters. Do not clash with them directly no matter what. Wildfighter reminded, a serious expression similarly appearing on his face. All you need to do is buy time. So long as you can hold them back for 40 seconds or so, we'll be free and can deal with them together. At this time, however, Shifeng suddenly said, that won't be necessary. Just leave these people to us. Focus on activating the teleportation gate and defending against what comes after. Guild leader Black Flame, we do not doubt your strength, but we really cannot take this risk. The members of Mythology's Silver Light Legion are all supported by a battle array. Their peak experts can hold their own against domain realm experts. Not to mention Sandstorm and his fellow team leaders are at the half-step domain realm at the very least. The few of them also possess some kind of strange strength. They aren't a force that an ordinary team of peak experts can hope to handle, Crimson Star advised hurriedly when she saw Shifeng dissuading them from taking part in the battle. Although Floating Lights Group only has a few members, every one of them is a peak expert. They can be of some help to you. She was confident that Shifeng would emerge victorious in a fight with Sandstorm's group. However, their problem right now wasn't whether they could defeat Sandstorm's group but whether they could prevent Sandstorm's group from interrupting the teleportation gate's activation. After all was said and done, Shifeng was only one person. Since Sandstorm's team had 30 players, how many could Shifeng possibly hold back by himself? Wildfighter also nodded in agreement with Crimson Star's words. He felt that Shifeng was being perverse about keeping up appearances. Don't misunderstand. We are fully capable of stopping this level of combat power. If you still feel uneasy, I won't object to you joining the battle, Shifeng said, chuckling at the anxious expressions on Crimson Star's and Wildfighter's faces. Although Shifeng did not speak that loudly, everyone present was a Tier 3 expert with extraordinary senses. Hence, even Sandstorm's group, which was still several hundred yards away, heard him clearly. Stop us. Sandstorm laughed at Shifeng's words, a cold glint appearing in his eyes. Let's see how you'll stop us then. You guys take action. As soon as Sandstorm finished speaking, 6 level 113 and higher assassins suddenly appeared within 50 yards of Crimson Star's group. The masked man at the head of the assassins radiated an aura rivaling that of mythic monsters. This lead assassin moved so quickly that he appeared within 30 yards of Crimson Star in just the blink of an eye. The assassin then unsheathed his daggers and sent several dozen arcs of light tearing through space toward Crimson Star and the dozen or so other players activating the teleportation gate. What? Some of them actually snuck over already. Floating Light's complexion paled upon seeing these 6 assassins. It was simply impossible for them to stop such a sudden and widespread attack. Even Shifeng would most likely be able to stop only a portion of these attacks. After all, Crimson Star and the others activating the teleportation gate stood a distance from each other. It was impossible for a melee player like Shifeng to cover all that ground simultaneously. Just when the several dozen arcs of light were about to land on Crimson Star and the others, however, ice walls started appearing out of thin air one after another, separating Crimson Star's group from the light arcs. Meanwhile, when these powerful light arcs, which were capable of tearing apart even space itself, landed on the ice walls, it was as if they had crashed into an impenetrable wall. Not only did the ice walls stop the advance of these light arcs, but they even deflected the attacks to a certain extent. In the end, not even one of the several dozen light arcs managed to land on their target. Impossible. My attack actually got deflected by a bunch of Tier 2 ice walls. The eyes of the level 114 Tier 4 assassin in the lead nearly fell out of their sockets when he saw this scene. Currently, thanks to the magic devouring gemstone, his Tier 3 skill already carried power at the Tier 4 standard, something a few measly Tier 2 ice walls couldn't hope to deflect. In fact, the Tier 2 ice walls shouldn't even be capable of affecting his attack at all. However, the impossible had actually happened. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Who took action? Sandstorm was likewise stunned by this scene. He then turned to Crimson Star and wondered, could it be her? At this moment, Sandstorm truly could not think of any elementalist, aside from Crimson Star, who could use Tier 2 ice walls to deflect Tier 4 attacks. On the other hand, Crimson Star was currently activating the teleportation gate. Logically, she shouldn't have any leeway to do anything else. Crimson Star herself was astonished by this situation. However, compared to a melee player like Sandstorm, she, as an elementalist, was much more sensitive to mana. Hence, she was able to trace the origin of the ice walls immediately. Xianxia. When Crimson Star turned to look at the origin of the ice walls, however, she was stunned when her gaze landed on Xianxia. Currently, ice-type mana swirled around Xianxia, a testament to the activation of an ice-type spell. Since when was she this strong? Chapter 2632, silenced battlefield. Upon seeing Xianxia take action, Violet Sword's members fell silent. Xianxia had attracted a lot of attention when she participated in the training for young talents in Violet Sword. One of the reasons for this was that she was only half a step away from entering the domain realm. The other reason was Instructor Tori's willingness to teach her. Hence, most of Violet Sword's upper echelon and peak experts had done their research on her and knew what kind of strength she possessed. However, the current Xianxia was like a completely different person from the one they knew. She had single-handedly stopped the attack of a peak expert whose basic attributes were at the Tier 4 standard. Moreover, this Tier 3 assassin expert was also clearly only half a step away from the domain realm. Of the Violet Sword members present, even domain realm experts like Crimson Star and Wildfighter might not be able to stop the assassin's attacks completely, yet Xianxia had. Naturally, this surprised Violet Sword's members. Her mana body is fully unlocked? Wildfighter, who stood relatively close to Xianxia, revealed astonishment on his face when he sensed intense mana fluctuations from her. Her mana body was only at a little more than 50% potential 3 days ago. What did Zero Wing do? Upon hearing Wildfighter's words, realization dawned upon the other Violet Sword members present, and every one of them stared at Xianxia in even greater astonishment. This was especially true for Floating Light, who had trained under Instructor Tori together with her. How is this possible? This is the mana body we are talking about. How can she fully unlock it in just 3 days? Floating Light's eyes widened in shock as he gaped at Xianxia. For a moment he felt as if he was looking at a stranger. When it came to talent in combat, he was superior to Xianxia. In addition, after he had trained in the ancient Secret Lands special training ground, his combat power was now recognized as almost equal to Solitary Frost's. In theory, he should be far superior to Xianxia. Now, however, it turned out that Xianxia's combat power actually surpassed his by a large margin. However, before Violet Sword's members could react to this unexpected development, Mythology's lead assassin made another move. This time, though, he dashed forward at great speed instead of launching a ranged attack. In no time at all, the lead assassin arrived within 10 yards of Crimson Star's group, this situation causing the expressions of Crimson Star and the others to darken. The assassin class wasn't known for its ranged attacks. The class truly shone in close combat. This was especially true for the explosive power the class could exhibit at melee range. Now, however, Solitary Frost had actually fully unlocked his mana body too. Since when did unlocking the mana body become so easy? While Crimson Star stewed in shock and confusion, Mythology's assassin leader, whose attacks got thwarted twice in a row, was extremely depressed. First it was Xianxia. Now it was Solitary Frost. He was clearly just one step away from foiling Violet Sword's plans, yet he got blocked time and again. Sandstorm, my side is in trouble. The kid I'm up against has already fully unlocked his mana body. His combat standard is also very high. He's not the slightest bit weaker than Wildfighter. If he focuses on deflecting my attacks, I don't think I can do anything to the casters within a short period. If Black Flame joins in on the fight, I'm afraid I won't even be able to escape, the lead assassin reported to Sandstorm through the team chat. Since the ambush has failed, retreat and regroup with us first. We'll focus on killing off as many of Zero Wings and Azure's members as possible, Sandstorm ordered, gritting his teeth when he saw Shifeng holding off the remaining 5 members of the assassin party. After saying so, Sandstorm hastened his footsteps. Previously, the main group of Mythology's team had deliberately exposed themselves to hold the attention of Shifeng and the other Zero Wing members with fully unlocked mana bodies so that the assassin party would succeed in its ambush. However, Azure turned out to have monsters with fully unlocked mana bodies as well. This unexpected development had thrown a wrench into Sandstorm's original plans. Everyone charge. No need to hold back anymore. We'll get rid of them together with the assassin party, Sandstorm shouted as he pointed at Zero Wings members. Upon seeing Sandstorm's team rushing toward Zero Wings and Azure's members, Crimson Star and Wildfighter could not help growing anxious. Guild leader Black Flame, we must not let that Tier 3 assassin regroup with Sandstorm's group. Team leaders like him can enter a battle array with each other. If we let him regroup with the main team, those team leaders will become even stronger. Crimson Star warned when she saw Mythology's assassin leader retreating at flying speeds. Relax. Even if they regroup, they have no chance of victory, Shifeng assured her, smiling. Even after seeing Mythology's assassin party retreating, he showed no intention of giving chase. But Crimson Star fell speechless when she saw Shifeng's nonchalant attitude toward Mythology. She knew that Zero Wing had sent over 100 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies this time. These experts undoubtedly possessed astonishing combat power. However, the 30-plus members of Mythology's Silver Light Legion were no pushovers either. With the assistance of a battle array, even those that hadn't fully unlocked their mana bodies could still exhibit combat power rivaling that of experts with fully unlocked mana bodies. In addition, every one of Mythology's members present was a bona fide peak expert or better. If the two sides clashed with each other, Zero Wing definitely wouldn't have an easy time. Good. Flowing Shadows party is almost back. Everyone get ready. It's time we let Zero Wing and Azure know the power of Mythology. Sandstorm said to the 3 other team leaders when he saw the assassin party within 100 yards of the main team. Leave it to us. Once we activate our battle array, even Black Flame shouldn't think of making short work of us, the female guardian knight standing beside Sandstorm said, nodding. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, just as Mythology's assassin party was about to rejoin Sandstorm's group, Shifeng glanced at Aqua Rose, who stood beside him. In response, Aqua Rose nodded and said calmly, "Everyone, no need to continue hiding. Let these people know our true power." As soon as Aqua Rose finished speaking, Zero Wing's members promptly removed their black cloaks. A tsunami of mana immediately flooded the area outside the ancient city. A powerful aura also swept across everyone on the battlefield, stopping Mythology's members in their tracks. And upon seeing the statistics of Zero Wing's members, Mythology's members could not help being dumbfounded. Currently, every Zero Wing member before them not only possessed a fully unlocked mana body but was also at level 117 or level 118. Zero Wing's melee players were especially eye-catching as every one of them actually boasted dark gold set equipment. Chapter 2633, Monsters. Those levels. How is this possible? Are they monsters? At this moment, let alone Mythology's members, even Violet Sword's members were stunned to see the levels of Zero Wing's members. Currently, even the peak experts of the various superpowers had reached only level 113 or level 114. However, even the lowest leveled Zero Wing member present was at level 117, far ahead of the superpowers' peak experts. Team leader Sandstorm, all of them have fully unlocked their mana bodies. Moreover, their equipment standards are quite high, especially for those melee players. I'm afraid we'll need a lot of time and resources to kill them. If Violet Sword's side manages to free up some manpower in the meantime, we'll be in danger. A Tier 3 Berserker from Mythology warned Sandstorm as he looked at the 100-plus Zero Wing members before them. Although the team leaders on their team had all fully unlocked their mana bodies, no one else on the team had. They only had the assistance of a battle array. However, even if they possessed superior basic attributes to Zero Wing's members, they definitely wouldn't be superior by much, judging by the equipment standard of Zero Wing's members. If it came down to a fight, they wouldn't have much of an advantage even in a one-on-one fight. Not to mention their team only had 30-odd members, whereas Zero Wing's side had more than 100 players. Overall, they were at a complete disadvantage. Damn it! You guys retreat. Sandstorm ordered, his complexion darkening as he gazed at Zero Wing's members. He then turned to the female guardian knight beside him and said, "Feather, you and the other team leaders continue fighting. We'll kill as many as we can. Retreat as soon as Crimson Star's group finishes activating the teleportation gate." "Got it," replied the female guardian knight named White Feather, unopposed to Sandstorm's decision. Team leaders like herself and Sandstorm currently possessed power at the Tier 4 standard. With the assistance of the battle array, their basic attributes were far superior to those of Zero Wing's members. Out of the Zero Wing members present, only Shifeng could actually put them in a bind. However, if the 5 of them split up and took action independently, they could slaughter quite a few of Zero Wing's members. Moreover, they had already used the precious magic devouring gemstones for the operation. If they still failed to produce any results, they would definitely be punished. Obedient to Sandstorm's command, everyone from Mythology aside from the 5 team leaders, promptly turned around and fled. However, as soon as Mythology's members took flight, a clear and crisp voice entered everyone's ears. Don't even think of getting away so easily. In the next moment, a magic array rapidly spread out from beneath Zhao Yueru's feet, summoning a barrier of flames. Covering a 500-yard radius around Zhao Yueru, the barrier trapped all of Mythology's members within it. Bastard! Sandstorm bellowed in rage when he saw the barrier of flames rise. He immediately charged straight at Zhao Yueru, his movement speed astonishing Violet Sword's members. Sandstorm was at least twice as fast as the assassin leader that attacked Crimson Star's group earlier. In the blink of an eye, he appeared over 50 yards from his original location. Everyone be careful. He's already capable of perfectly integrating advanced footwork into his movement skill. Do not clash with him directly. Wildfighter warned, a grim expression appearing on his face at Sandstorm's astonishing speed. Among the various types of combat techniques available, the most difficult type to integrate with skills and spells was footwork. Integrating footwork with a movement skill was especially challenging. Even in Violet Sword, only a few individuals were capable of this. Anyone who achieved this integration could freely weave their way through an army of tens of thousands. Not to mention, Sandstorm's basic attributes were currently at the Tier 4 standard. With the combination of his speed and strength, he was basically unstoppable. In just 3 seconds, Sandstorm penetrated Zero Wing's defensive line and arrived behind Zhao Yueru. He then executed a downward slash at the elementalist's back using the silver shortsword he wielded. Die, you hindrance! Sandstorm bellowed. Immediately, mana gathered around his shortsword and coalesced into a great sword that left a dark void in its wake. Just when the great sword was about to land on Zhao Yueru, however, a lithe figure suddenly appeared beside the elementalist and sent a sword light cutting at the great sword. Boom! A loud explosion shook the battlefield, and the space surrounding the point of collision shattered into oblivion. The resulting shockwave sent all the players within a 10-yard radius of the explosion's epicenter flying. Impossible! She blocked it. White Feather, who was watching from a distance, doubted her eyes when she saw Gentle Snow stopping Sandstorm's attack. Although Sandstorm was an assassin, he had been drastically strengthened by the magic-devouring gemstone and the advanced battle array. His current strength far exceeded that of ordinary mythic monsters of the same level. With the boost in power his Tier 3 skill provided, his attack should be capable of repulsing even bona fide mythic monsters. However, despite being merely a Tier 3 player, Gentle Snow had actually managed to receive the attack without losing any ground. A special skill? Sandstorm muttered. Although he was similarly surprised that Gentle Snow stopped his attack, he quickly realized the reason why she was able to do so. I don't know what skill you used to stop my attack, but since it is a skill and not a combat technique, you'll only be able to stop me once. I refuse to believe you can continue stopping me. After saying so, Sandstorm readied himself to launch another attack. However, as if Gentle Snow had long anticipated this, she intercepted him, executing 4 attacks with her great sword. Will of Light. 4 extreme slashes. Boom, 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 boom. Sandstorm quickly responded to Gentle Snow's intervention, rapidly brandishing his shortsword to defend against the 4 slashes. Every attack he blocked sent him stumbling 1 step back. Are you done using your skill yet? Although Sandstorm was forced to retreat by 4 steps, he still maintained a calm expression. He then smirked and said, "If you're done, it's my turn now." However, just as Sandstorm finished speaking, Gentle Snow raised Glorious Will above her head. At the same time, her body started releasing a sacred glow that suppressed even the space around her. Disappear! Gentle Snow shouted as she swung Glorious Will down at Sandstorm. A boundless light devoured Sandstorm. Myth of Light. With just 1 attack, Gentle Snow obliterated everything before her within 100 yards. Even space itself shattered. As for Sandstorm, he went flying over 100 yards away, his HP falling below 50% and his body covered in injuries. When he hit the ground, the impact created a huge crater. Upon seeing this scene, everyone present was astonished. Violet Swords and Mythology's members in particular could not help gaping in shock. Just how many cards does Zero Wing have hidden? Crimson Star wondered aloud as she stared at Gentle Snow. First it was Sherfong. Now it was Gentle Snow. Gentle Snow was clearly only at the Void Realm standard. In terms of basic attributes, she had to be quite inferior to Sandstorm. Moreover, Sandstorm had also fully unlocked his mana body already. The only advantage she had was her level of 118. No matter how Crimson Star looked at it, Gentle Snow shouldn't be a match for Sandstorm. In the end, however, Gentle Snow had used only a few moves to topple Sandstorm. The power of her final attack in particular practically rivaled that of the attack Sherfeng used to deal with the two region chiefs. Feather, what should we do? Sandstorm is already heavily injured. There's still Sinful Flame on Azure's side. With just the four of us, I'm afraid we'll have difficulty accomplishing anything. The Tier 3 Elementalist standing beside White Feather asked when he saw Sandstorm struggling even to stand up right now. With the situation as it was, they wouldn't gain anything from continuing this fight. Out of the 5 team leaders taking part in this operation, Sandstorm was the strongest while White Feather came second. Now that Sandstorm was heavily injured and occupied in battle, it was up to White Feather to take charge. We retreat. Zero Wing's strength exceeds our expectations. We need to report this matter to the Vice Commander as soon as possible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But what about the fire barrier? The Tier 3 Elementalist asked as he looked at the barrier of flames surrounding them. If I use my trump card, I should be able to shatter it. Once it's gone, have everyone retreat at full speed. White Feather instructed. All right. I'll have them scatter and run, the Tier 3 Elementalist said, nodding. Following which, White Feather shattered Zhao Yueru's barrier of flames with a single move. She and Mythology's other members then scattered and fled. As for Zero Wing's members, they persistently hunted down Mythology's members. In the end, they killed not only 20+ of Mythology's peak experts but also Sandstorm and 2 other team leaders, inflicting severe losses on Mythology's Silver Light Legion. Word of this battle also quickly spread throughout Violet Light City, shaking all those who heard it. Chapter 2634. Fame spreads across the Western continent. The Silver Light Legion was Mythology's strongest trump card legion. It might not have many members, but every member had astonishing combat power. Moreover, the peak experts of the Legion all possessed the assistance of a battle array. All this time, the Silver Light Legion had been in existence, the various superpowers dreaded. Meanwhile, although Violet Light City was a guild city jointly established by Violet Sword and Mythology, as many superpowers were partners with these super guilds, there were plenty of members of other superpowers present in the city. Word of Sandstorm's team suffering a tragic defeat triggered heated debates among the various superpowers members resting within Violet Light City. Some could not help doubting the validity of this information. In their opinion, Mythology's Silver Light Legion was basically an invincible existence. At this stage of the game, no matter how strong a team of players became, it would, at best, be the Silver Light Legion's equal. The utter rout brooded about was definitely impossible for the Silver Light Legion. How could a pseudo-superpower like Zero Wing have a team capable of defeating the Silver Light Legion? While the various superpowers operating in Violet Light City were looking into this matter, White Feather and the other survivors of Sandstorm's team were currently standing inside a meeting room in Mythology's residence and reporting about it to the white-haired youth before them. White Feather and the others gazed at this white-haired youth with reverence in their eyes. This was because this white-haired youth was none other than the Silver Light Legion's vice commander, Prosciutto, nicknamed the Silver Ghost. You're saying Zero Wing has over 100 members with fully unlocked mana bodies? The Silver Ghost asked calmly as he looked at White Feather. In addition, according to our investigations, before Azure's Solitary Frost and Yen Xiaoqian underwent Zero Wing's special training, both of them were still quite some distance away from fully unlocking their mana bodies. Now, however, both of them have already done so, and they now rival Crimson Star and Wild Fighter in combat power, White Feather replied seriously while nodding. It seems Zero Wing has quite a lot of secrets, Prosciutto commented as he entered deep thought. Vice Commander, they activated the teleportation gate not long ago. Why don't I organize another team and wait for them to come out? Previously we lost mainly because we were outnumbered. If we have more people in the team, Zero Wing won't have much of an advantage over us, White Feather suggested. Now that news of the Silver Light Legion's defeat had spread, they would definitely become a laughingstock among the superpowers if they could not take care of Zero Wing in short order. That won't be necessary, Prosciutto said. Chuckling, he continued, since Zero Wing wants to become famous, we'll fulfill their wish. Notify the ones below and have them publicize this information. I believe plenty of superpowers and major corporations will be interested in Zero Wing's secret for unlocking the mana body. Vice Commander, although the other superpowers will definitely be interested in this secret, if we don't make a move ourselves, I'm afraid no superpower will be willing to take action against Zero Wing. In the end, everyone will simply sit back and watch Zero Wing develop, White Feather said worriedly. Relax. Soon we'll be done with the task the demon god assigned us. At that time, the kingdoms and empires on the continent will no longer serve as a protective shield for the various powers. Meanwhile, with how much resources Zero Wing is occupying, it will become the common target of the superpowers. We won't need to make a move at all, Prosciutto said, smiling. That quest is almost complete? White Feather's eyes glowed with excitement when she heard Prosciutto's words. There were 2 crucial quests available in the demon god's shrine, and the completion of either of them could kick up a storm throughout the Western continent. Mythology had chosen to challenge one of those quests. Originally, though, she thought that they would need a lot more time to complete it. If they really completed that quest, then even if Zero Wing cleared the ancient Secret Lands hero trial, it would be meaningless. The only outcome awaiting Zero Wing would be destruction. All right, go make the necessary preparations to publicize Zero Wing's information. Also, send someone to the Eastern Continent to notify Vice Guild leader Cold Shadow about the quest's progress. She should know how to deal with Zero Wing, Prosciutto commanded. Understood. White Feather replied before leaving the meeting room. News of Zero Wing having over 100 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies spread across the entire Western continent, instantly garnering great fame for Zero Wing. At the same time, though, the Western continent's powers also grew jealous of Zero Wing and started coveting its secrets. The guild immediately became the focal point of the Western continent as the various powers began investigating it. As Zero Wing's fame was spreading across the Western continent, Crimson Star was leading Shifeng and the others into the hero trial. After everyone walked through the teleportation gate and arrived inside the trial grounds, they immediately fell silent. An indescribably solemn expression also appeared on their faces. The reason for this was the intense gravity in the trial grounds. The moment they entered, it felt as if several hundred kilograms had been added to their bodies. Now, let alone fighting, even walking normally was a challenge. In addition, the tunnel they were currently standing in was incomparably dark, which hampered their vision greatly. In fact, aside from their sense of sight, the rest of their 5 senses were also significantly blunted. Now they felt as if the standard of their 5 senses wasn't even on par with the 5 senses of Tier 1 players. The worst part of it all was the tens of thousands of humanoid monsters ahead of them. Aside from being fully geared in armor, these humanoid monsters also held long swords and carried longbows on their backs. Looking at this scene, everyone could not help feeling that they had just entered an ancient battlefield. Trial Warrior, Dark Creature, Great Lord, Level 120 HP 100, 000, 000/100, 000, 000, Trial Elite, Dark Creature, Grand Lord, Level 121 HP 430, 000, 000/430, 000, 000. However, before everyone could digest the information before them, the sound of system notifications entered their ears. System, you have discovered the hero trial space. System, hero trial activated. You have 5 natural days to complete the trial. You will be awarded based on the trial's completion rate. 5 days. How can we possibly get through so many monsters in just 5 days? Floating Light suspected that the system was toying with them when he stared at the endless trial warriors and trial elites before him. The monsters in this trial space were ordinary monsters, which normally wouldn't pose much of a threat to the experts on their team. However, that was in the outside world. Inside the trial space, their physical bodies and 5 senses were heavily suppressed. Even a domain realm expert like himself could barely exhibit 30% of his normal combat power under such a suppression. At this moment, he would have great trouble fighting the trial warriors in a one-on-one situation, let alone the trial elites. Meanwhile, there was only one path in this trial space, so there was no way they could avoid the trial warriors and trial elites entirely. The only way to get to the trial boss was to kill these monsters and gradually carve out a path. Meanwhile, when Crimson Star and Wild Fighter, who had started growing optimistic of success after witnessing Zero Wing's strength, saw this scene, they were likewise stunned. Not only are the monsters here numerous, but they are also positioned very close together. Even if we lure just one of them, I'm afraid we'll end up luring several thousand. In addition, all of these monsters are capable of ranged attacks. Let alone fighting, even dodging their attacks would be a problem. Wild Fighter frowned at the trial warriors and trial elites that filled the tunnel before him. Although he had long known that the hero trial would be difficult, he never thought that it would be this difficult. With their bodies so heavily suppressed, if they tried fighting several thousand of these monsters simultaneously, they would definitely be honeycombed in no time. Look closer. The weapons of those monsters are enchanted with the penetrating effect. Not to mention other melee players, even MTs won't be able to tank more than a handful of those monsters. The slightest mistake would mean death. Although I have some spells that can stop a portion of the ranged attacks, there are simply too many monsters. The help I can provide will be negligible, Crimson Star said, a bitter smile forming on her face as she pointed at the trial elite's weapons. Our only option is to have our ranged players kite the monsters and whittle away their numbers. However, if we do that, killing all these monsters in just 5 days will be utterly impossible. Upon hearing Crimson Star's words, Duan Hans Han and the other experts from the Azure Chamber of Commerce also nodded in agreement. Any melee expert that hadn't reached the Void Realm would get slaughtered if they tried going up against more than a handful of these trial monsters by themselves. However, their team simply had too few peak experts. They couldn't form a front line capable of effectively holding off the trial monsters. Their only option was to have the ranged players kite the monsters and have the melee players repel any monsters that got too close for comfort. However, while this strategy was very safe, the efficiency was abysmal. Vice Commander Crimson, you say can block a portion of the ranged attacks? Shifeng asked after giving the matter some thought. Yes. I can block roughly 20% to 30% of the ranged attacks. However, there are simply too many monsters here. Against the attacks of several thousand monsters, even if I manage to block 30%, it will do little to no good for those dodging the attacks, Crimson Star said, nodding. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If you can block that much, then there shouldn't be any problem, Shifeng said after making some mental calculations. Afterward, my side will stand at the front and attract the monsters' attacks. Everyone else just has to attack with everything you've got. We should be able to get to the trial boss within the stipulated time. You'll attract the attacks? Crimson Star was stunned by Shifeng's words. She simply couldn't understand why Shifeng didn't consider this a problem. These were the simultaneous attacks of several thousand monsters they were talking about. Moreover, some of these monsters even had weapons with enhanced penetrative effects. Not to mention, in this horrible environment, even peak experts would have difficulty evading the attacks of the trial monsters, let alone Zero Wings members, who were mainly at the refinement realm standard. However, before Crimson Star and the others could react to Shifeng's proposal, the swordsman had already commanded Zero Wing's 100+ experts to take action. And these Zero Wing members immediately charged at the nearby trial warriors and trial elites without the slightest bit of hesitation. Chapter 2635. A stroll through the backyard? Upon seeing Zero Wings members dash straight toward the nearest group of trial monsters, Violet Swords and Azure's members gaped in shock. They were going up against several thousand monsters here. Moreover, even the weakest of these monsters was a level 120 Great Lord. Yet Shifeng didn't even bother to discuss positioning and individual assignments before having Zero Wings members charge straight into battle. This was the first time Violet Swords and Azure's members had seen such leadership. To make matters worse, every one of Zero Wings members actually obeyed Shifeng's command. This is just too reckless. Wild Fighter could not help feeling anxious when he saw Shifeng proceeding with utter disregard for their opinions. There are several thousand monsters. Even if they have fully unlocked mana bodies and can take some hits, if they can't dodge attacks, they'll still end up dead. He admitted that Zero Wings members were very high-leveled. In addition, every one of them also had a fully unlocked mana body. Zero Wings members definitely had a greater advantage when going up against the trial monsters than Violet Sword's peak experts did. However, the system was clearly trying to test players' combat standards in this tunnel. Levels and fully unlocked mana bodies were only secondary. Currently, they were already tight for time because the trial duration was only 5 days instead of the expected 7 days. If they died here and lost a day's worth of progress, they definitely wouldn't be able to complete the trial. We have no choice but to go along with them, Crimson Star sighed when she saw Zero Wings members getting close to the nearest group of trial monsters. I'll activate my magic array in a moment. Everyone else, focus fire on the trial elites. So long as we reduce the number of penetrating attacks we have to deal with, we can stop the remaining trial monsters much more easily. Sinful Flame and the other members of Azure nodded in agreement with Crimson Star's plan before charging toward the nearest trial elite. They intended to get rid of a few trial elites as soon as the battle between both sides started, so that they could lessen the pressure on Zero Wings members and minimize casualties. The instant Zero Wings members entered the trial monsters' perception range, the trial warriors and trial elites promptly sprang into action like veterans of the battlefield. In no time at all, 400 trial warriors spread out into a square formation around the main army. They then stabbed the iron shields they carried into the ground, creating an iron wall that protected the several thousand other trial monsters within their formation. As for the trial monsters inside the square formation, they unslung their bows, split up into several divisions, and fired arrows at Zero Wings members in intervals. This scene stunned Violet Swords and Azure's members momentarily. They had seen monsters attacking as an orderly group before, but this was definitely their first time seeing monsters attacking in such a well-trained fashion. In fact, the coordination of these trial monsters rivaled that of NPCs. Volleys of arrows rained down on Zero Wings members, each volley consisting of more than 1,000 arrows. Moreover, the intervals between the volleys were incredibly short. The arrows in each volley were also well spaced, leaving no room for Zero Wings members to exploit. Over. Even peak experts will have difficulty dodging and blocking all those arrows. With the combat standards of Zero Wings members, several volleys would be enough to annihilate them. Wildfighter's complexion darkened significantly when he saw the spate of arrows bombarding Zero Wings members. Against such a coordinated and accurate assault, let alone Zero Wings members, even a group of peak experts wouldn't survive for very long. Although the attack pattern was very monotonous, the arrows flew incredibly fast. In addition, they came in torrents. There was a limit to the number of actions and reactions a person could make within a certain period. Over this limit, even domain realm experts would be rendered powerless and could only watch as they got killed. Although these arrows didn't carry a lot of power, they still weren't attacks players like themselves could afford to receive casually. At this moment, every one of Zero Wings members would have to go up against at least 10 arrows simultaneously, with some unlucky ones having to go up against as many as 20. After factoring in the speed of the arrows, these numbers had already exceeded the limits of even Tier 3 peak experts. Only domain realm experts would be able to accurately determine the trajectories of these arrows and react to them in time. Just when the first volley of arrows was about to land on Zero Wings members, a voice appeared in the team chat. Vice Commander Crimson, activate your defensive magic array. Shifeng ordered unhurriedly as he looked at the descending arrows. Got it. Upon hearing Shifeng's command, Crimson Star snapped out of her daze and waved her staff, completing the activation of the magic array she had prepared beforehand. A silver barrier bloomed from the center of Zero Wings formation, instantly expanding to cover a 200-yard radius and enveloping all of Zero Wings members within it. Tier 3 Curse Aerial Defense. Aerial defense was a curse that had a certain probability of invalidating the flying tools within its range. It was similarly effective against arrows. In the next moment, more than 20% of the first arrow volley clattered to the ground. Now, only about 900 arrows continued flying toward Zero Wings members. Even so, Violet Swords and Azure's members still wore grim expressions on their faces. Although the number of arrows had been reduced to around 900, the number of attacks each of Zero Wings members had to face still exceeded the limit of peak experts, let alone refinement realm experts. As Violet Swords and Azure's members were shaking their heads and sighing, Zero Wings members started maneuvering around the arrows, dodging them effortlessly as if they had long since known the trajectories of these arrows. From afar, it seemed as if Zero Wings members were dancing in a rain of arrows. When the first volley of arrows ended, not a single Zero Wing member had suffered a direct hit. While some Zero Wing members had lost roughly a quarter of their HP, that was merely a result of them defending against the Trial Elite's penetrating arrows. The HP they lost was also instantly replenished by the healers on the team. How is that possible? Floating Light's eyes bulged when he saw this scene. Against that volley of arrows, even he wouldn't have such an easy time blocking and defending. However, Zero Wing's members had dealt with the volley of arrows as if they were just strolling through their backyard. At this moment, let alone Floating Light, even Solitary Frost and Xianxia, who had trained with Zero Wing's members for the past few days, were astonished by this scene. Despite the majority of Zero Wing's members being only at the refinement realm, they had easily dealt with an attack that even peak experts would find troublesome. This was simply unbelievable. They can actually block and dodge that kind of attack so easily? Just what kind of training do they normally undergo? Xianxia's heart roiled with confusion as she looked at Zero Wing's refinement realm experts. What Xianxia and the others did not know was that Zero Wing's core members had long since familiarized themselves with attacks like the Trial Monster's arrow attacks. After all, they faced much worse when they were training at the Extraordinary Tower's first floor. In fact, in the opinions of Zero Wing's members, blocking and dodging the Trial Monster's arrow attacks would still be a cakewalk even without Crimson Star's support. After enduring several volleys of arrows, Shifeng noticed that all of the agitated Trial Monsters had shifted their attention to Zero Wing's members. He then ordered through the team chat, "We've stabilized the aggro. Everyone start attacking." Upon hearing Shifeng's command, Violet Sword's and Azure's members snapped out of their daze and started launching attacks at the Trial Monsters, together with Zero Wing's members. Because Zero Wing's members were holding aggro, everyone else could attack freely without having to worry about getting attacked themselves. As a result, the Trial Monsters fell rapidly one after another. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, everyone discovered that these Trial Monsters granted a surprisingly large amount of EXP, basically 3 times higher than normal. At this discovery, Violet Sword's and Azure's members grew ecstatic. The only disappointing thing about these Trial Monsters was that they did not drop any loot. After the team grinded the Trial Monsters for more than half a day, something strange occurred. One of the Trial Elites killed suddenly burst into flames and transformed into a dilapidated crystal steel that hovered quietly in the air. The steel radiated frightening mana fluctuations that sent many of the Tier 3 experts present stumbling back. An ancient legacy steel. When Shifeng saw this worn steel, his eyes widened in shock, and he could not help wondering whether he was hallucinating. Chapter 2636. Beginning of Chaos. Shifeng aside, the sudden appearance of the crystal steel surprised everyone else present and piqued their curiosity. They never thought that the Trial Monsters, which had not dropped a single item until now, would actually drop a steel. What an amazing steel! It's causing the ambient mana density to skyrocket just by hovering there. Even the surrounding space has become heavier. Crimson Star exclaimed when she registered the changes the crystal steel brought to its environs. If a Tier 2 player were here, they wouldn't even be able to approach it. In regard to this situation, though, Violet Sword's members could not help a little disappointment. Even a fool could tell that the crystal steel was extraordinary. However, according to the agreement between Zero Wing and Violet Sword, aside from the trial boss's loot, every other discovery made and loot found in the trial would belong to Zero Wing. Hence they could only look at the steel. What is this steel? Not only can it not be appraised, but you can't even touch it. It's as if this steel doesn't exist in this space, Aqua Rose said with a gloomy expression on her face as she stood before the steel. Could it be a holographic projection? This crystal steel was incredibly precious. Even if they couldn't appraise it and discover its uses, they could still set it up inside a room to increase the room's mana density. This room could then be used as a training facility for players. However, if this treasure was merely a hologram, then it can't even serve as a decoration. This isn't a hologram. It's just that we can't touch it, Shifeng said, smiling. Guild leader, you're still in the mood for jokes? If we can't touch it, then we can only look at this steel and nothing more, Aqua Rose said anxiously when she saw Shifeng's nonchalant attitude toward this situation. In God's domain, the prerequisite for players to store an item in their bag space was for them to come into physical contact with the target item. If they couldn't touch the steel, how were they supposed to take it away? Looking at it is indeed our only option, Shifeng said, nodding while smiling. This steel isn't an item that can be taken away. The only thing we can take away is the information recorded on it. The existence of ancient legacy steels was still foreign to the current players of God's domain because these steels appeared only in ancient ruins or secret lands. In the past, the discovery of an ancient legacy steel would always trigger a storm of bloodshed. This was because ancient legacy steels recorded the lost technology of ancient civilization. Any guild that managed to get their hands on this technology could undergo a qualitative transformation. In Shifeng's previous life, a total of 5 ancient legacy steels had appeared in God's domain. During the 10 years God's domain had been in operation, only 5 ancient legacy steels had appeared. One could easily imagine the value of those steels. This was also the reason why Shifeng was so excited to see the ancient legacy steel appear in the hero trial. Take away the information recorded? Aqua Rose was confused by Shifeng's words. No matter how she looked at the steel, she simply couldn't imagine how he was going to take away the information on it. Currently they couldn't touch the steel at all. And even after using the master-ranked appraisal, she still couldn't extract any information from the steel. Just how were they supposed to take the recorded information? You can't extract the information recorded on the steel using normal methods. Not only is the information recorded massive, but it is also extremely complex. If you wish to extract the recorded information, you have to record the magic arrays carved on the steel, Shifeng explained. Record the magic arrays on it? Aqua Rose gaped in shock as she looked at the worn steel. There were roughly 40 magic arrays engraved on the crystal steel, and even the simplest one was an advanced magic array. Recording them all was simply a joke. They could spend only 5 days inside the trial space. Meanwhile, it took around half a day to learn one advanced magic array. What more magic arrays above the advanced rank? Relax. This task might be difficult for others, but it isn't particularly difficult for me. All I need is some time, Shifeng said confidently. During this period you'll lead the team and continue taking care of the trial monsters. Learning the magic arrays recorded on the ancient legacy steel would indeed be arduous for an advanced magician. However, he had long been an intermediate master magician. 2 or 3 days would be more than enough for him to learn and record these magic arrays. I understand. Aqua Rose nodded before taking charge of the team to continue clearing out the trial monsters in their way. As for Shifeng, he sat quietly before the ancient legacy steel, confusing Violet Sword's members. However, they did not put too much thought into the matter. After all, the steel belonged to Zero Wing. How Zero Wing dealt with it was up to the guild's discretion. Meanwhile, Shifeng started analyzing the layers of magic arrays engraved on the steel. Learning a magic array was considerably easier than decoding one. The troublesome part was having to memorize a lot of things. However, Shifeng's brain capacity now surpassed that of ordinary people. Learning and recording the magic arrays was a piece of cake for him. In less than an hour, Shifeng had already memorized one advanced magic array and started on the second one. In the meantime, Aqua Rose and the others kept clearing out trial monsters and advancing down the tunnel. However, the deeper into the tunnel they went, the more densely packed the trial monsters became. As for the superpowers, they promptly held meetings to draft countermeasures for the expansion pack's activation. Meanwhile, as the entire God's domain was in chaos, Shifeng slowly stood up from in front of the ancient legacy steel inside the ancient secret land. Finally, success. Shifeng smiled when he saw the steel before him gradually fading out of existence. He then started drawing the magic arrays he memorized, which released a frightening aura that shook even the surrounding space. Chapter 2637. Astonishing Memory Crystal. The commotion caused by the ancient legacy steel was huge. Even Crimson Star and the others, who were resting over 3,000 yards away, sensed the unusual mana fluctuation from the steel. Did something happen over there? This mana fluctuation rivals what Tier 5 NPCs cause when using Tier 5 spells, Crimson Star exclaimed as she turned toward the mana fluctuation's origin, horror coloring her eyes. Isn't that guild leader Black Flame's current location? Did something happen to him? Wildfighter similarly revealed a serious expression on his face when he felt the intense mana fluctuation. Tier 5 NPCs were existences that stood at the apex of God's domain. The Tier 5 spells used by these NPCs could wreak great devastation. Before such spells, Tier 3 players like themselves wouldn't even be able to put up the slightest bit of resistance. Everyone present would be instantly killed. Meanwhile, all sorts of dangers filled this trial space. The trial monsters weren't the only threat here. There were also plenty of traps and dangerous events that occurred at random. An ambush by a Tier 5 spell was well within the range of possibilities. If something really happened to Shifeng, then it would deal a huge blow to the entire team. After all, their team revolved around Shifeng. Even though the experts on the team understood that Aqua Rose was the person leading them all this time, if he disappeared, many of those experts would most likely question her leadership. In this situation, Aqua Rose had to contact Shifeng immediately. "Guild leader, is everything all right on your side?" Aqua Rose asked worriedly. Currently, nobody was more anxious than she was about this sudden mana fluctuation. She knew that Shifeng was under the demon god's curse, which tripled his death penalty. Meanwhile, players inside the trial space could only wait to get automatically resurrected. Hence, if an ordinary player needed 1 day to get automatically resurrected, then Shifeng would need 3 days. If he died right now, then their odds of clearing the hero trial would become even slimmer. "Relax, everything's fine. I just unlocked the information recorded on the stele," Shifeng said, smiling when he saw the anxious look on Aqua Rose's face. Unlocking the information actually caused such a huge commotion? Aqua Rose was stunned when she heard Shifeng's words. This was definitely the strongest mana fluctuation she had experienced in God's domain. If this mana fluctuation were due to a spell, she wouldn't be surprised if it destroyed an entire NPC city. However, Shifeng was telling her that this frightening mana fluctuation was merely a consequence of unlocking the recorded information on the stele. This was simply unbelievable. This is information left behind by an ancient god. It is naturally extraordinary. However, I still need some time to complete the unlocking process. For now, continue clearing the trial monsters on your side. I'll meet up with you once I'm done, Shifeng explained and chuckled. In reality, the mana fluctuation had surprised even Shifeng. From what he knew about ancient legacy steles, the strength of the mana fluctuation when the recorded information was unlocked was an indicator of the recorded information's value. Generally, though, the mana fluctuations that occurred extended only 1 or 2,000 yards. Now, however, the mana fluctuation from this ancient legacy stele reached Aqua Rose's location, roughly 3,000 yards away. It rivaled the ancient legacy stele found in the ancient god's tomb, a level 150+ ancient secret land. However, the ancient god's tomb's minimum entry requirement was Tier 4. "Alright, I'll notify the others," Aqua Rose answered. After giving the matter some thought, she found Shifeng's words reasonable. Since the information recorded on the stele was something left behind by an ancient god, it naturally wouldn't be something ordinary. She then turned to the rest of the team and said, "Everyone, please rest assured. Nothing has happened to the guild leader." The guild leader said that this mana fluctuation is merely a consequence of him unlocking the information recorded on the stele. He says that he is not in any danger and that we should continue clearing out the remaining trial monsters. He will rejoin us shortly. Aqua Rose's words kindled a sense of admiration toward Shifeng in everyone in the team. They hadn't thought that Shifeng would actually be able to obtain something from the stele. After a brief discussion, they promptly resumed clearing out the trial monsters in their path. In the meantime, Shifeng was staring intently at the gradually forming crystal hovering before him. When extracting information from ancient legacy steles, once players successfully learned the magic arrays recorded on a stele and drew them, the drawn magic arrays would gather mana from the surroundings to create a memory crystal. This was one of the more common methods ancient gods used to pass down their legacies. After all, compared to books, memory crystals were much better at withstanding the ravages of time. So long as the memory crystal was intact, there wouldn't be any need to worry about parts of the information getting lost. 3 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours. After the magic arrays gathered mana for 15 consecutive hours, a memory crystal the size of 4 adult fists took shape before Shifeng. This memory crystal was at least triple the size of ordinary memory crystals. Amazing! Just what is recorded in it? Feng gazed at the memory crystal before him in astonishment. The memory crystals that Eliade had given him already contained a ton of information. If not for his brain capacity being sufficiently high, he would have lost consciousness when accepting all that information. The memory crystal before him, however, was 3 times larger than the ones the heavenly blue saint had given him. The amount of information contained within this unusually large memory crystal was definitely several dozen times more. Feng could not even begin to imagine what kind of information awaited him. After observing the memory crystal for a brief moment, Feng then tapped his finger on it to access its recorded information. He was really eager to find out what it contained. However, as soon as he did so, he was stunned. System. This memory crystal is extremely unstable and can remain in existence for only 2 natural days before disappearing. System. Warning. You have discovered a large memory crystal. Because of insufficient concentration, you are unable to read the information completely. If you persist in reading the information, there is a very large chance you will enter a deep coma. Do you still wish to read the information? I can't read it even as a Tier 3 player? The system notifications took Feng aback. Just what is recorded inside? This was definitely the first time he had come across such a situation. In fact, he had never heard of something like this happening before. It seems I toiled for nothing. Sure enough, the information recorded on an ancient legacy stele really isn't easy to obtain. Feng smiled bitterly as he looked at the memory crystal in his hands. Having insufficient concentration wasn't a problem that could be solved quickly. Items capable of raising one's concentration were extremely rare in God's domain. The concentration he could receive from raising his levels and improving his equipment was also negligible at best. If he couldn't process the recorded information with the concentration of a Tier 3 player, then he would have to wait until he had completed his Tier 4 promotion. As for forcefully trying to read the recorded information, this was absolutely out of the question. Ostensibly, there was only a very large chance for him to enter a deep coma. In reality, if he did try to read the information, then he was guaranteed to fall into a coma. The time he would lose from being in a coma was one thing. What he truly feared was the irreparable brain damage. If that happened, he would have a much more difficult time with future tier promotions. Something he definitely didn't want. Even if the information recorded in this memory crystal was incredibly valuable, he still wouldn't trade his future for it. After all, compared to the information left behind by an ancient god, reaching Tier 5 and Tier 6 was much more important. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Wait. There's another method I can use to read this memory crystal. Just as Feng was about to store the memory crystal, he received a sudden inspiration. Divine Will. If I can polish myself using the Tier 4 Divine Will, I can push my concentration from the peak of Tier 3 to the Tier 4 standard. So long as my concentration reaches the Tier 4 standard, I shouldn't have any problems reading the information recorded in this. The more Feng thought about it, the more he found his plan to be feasible. Anyone else would still have difficulties pushing their concentration to the Tier 4 standard within 2 short days, even if they could train themselves using the Tier 4 Divine Will. However, it was a different story for him. Thanks to his advanced bloodline, his concentration standard had long since reached the peak of Tier 3, just a step shy of the Tier 4 standard. Moreover, he was very familiar with training using the Divine Will. Given one day, he had an excellent chance of pushing his concentration to the Tier 4 standard. No sooner had Feng stored the memory crystal than Aqua Rose called him and announced, "Guild leader, we discovered the trial boss." Chapter 2638. Ancient Lich. Black Dragon's soul. Aqua Rose and the others wore grim expressions on their faces as they looked at a towering, dilapidated altar some distance away in the middle of the tunnel. The reason for their reactions was that the altar's surroundings were filled with trial warriors and trial elites, these monsters numbering around 3,000, in addition to the trial boss. Moreover, the 4 corners of the altar each had a mana tower. Not only did the mana towers suppress all hostile forces within their range, but they also prevented players from using any skills and spells. This is just cheating. Not only are there so many monsters around the boss, but there are actually 4 mana towers as well. With this, let alone a 200-man team, even a 2,000-man team can't do anything. Floating Light cursed despite himself as he looked at the 4 mana towers. Mana towers were strategic-level defensive constructions, and not just any ordinary constructions, but top-tier advanced constructions. They were also things that players on the Western continent were extremely familiar with. After all, every one of the Western continent's NPC cities possessed these defensive constructions. The Mana Tower was also a large part of the reason why the Western continent's NPC cities could develop steadily despite having to face the constant threat of the demonic creature armies. Originally, the trial boss and its underlings already had an absolute advantage. Now these monsters even boasted the protection of 4 mana towers. How were players like themselves supposed to clear this trial? Sure enough, it is still too early for us to come here. Crimson Star could not help a bitter smile as she considered the resting lich sitting atop the altar. Zorok. Ancient Lich, Superior Mythic. Level 122 HP 3. 700, 000/3. 700, 000/000. While Zorok's HP of 3.7 billion wasn't particularly high for an ancient lich, this amount was more than enough to instill despair into players. Very few magically oriented monsters existed in God's domain. However, compared to physically oriented monsters of the same level and rank, magically oriented monsters were around 30% to 40% more difficult to handle. This was akin to the difference between physical class NPCs and magical class NPCs. Magical class NPCs were more adept at executing long-range AoE attacks and could wreak much greater destruction than physical class NPCs could. Meanwhile, ancient liches were monsters that possessed magical talent surpassing even that of elves. In the hands of an ancient lich, spells were no different from toys. It could play around with magic however it wanted to. Previously, Violet Sword had come across a level 87, mythic-ranked ancient lich out in the fields. In order to defeat it, the guild had dispatched a 5,000-man legion filled with level 90-plus experts, who had taken turns attacking the boss in teams of 1,000. In the end they had slain the ancient lich, but at the cost of nearly 4,000 experts. Now not only was the ancient lich before them level 122, but it was even a superior mythic-ranked monster. If they came across this ancient lich in the outside world, they would have most likely turned tail and fled already. To make matters worse, there were thousands of trial monsters and 4 mana towers supporting the ancient lich. With this, even a 10,000-man legion filled with expert players of the same level wouldn't be able to raid it. At this moment, let alone Violet Swords and Azure's members, even Aqua Rose and the other Zero Wing members frowned upon seeing Zorok. After all, the raid difficulty of this trial boss was simply stratospheric. In fact, in their opinion, Zorok was no longer a boss that players could challenge at Tier 3. Only a Tier 4 team would have any hope of raiding it. Guild Leader Black Flame, the boss's raid difficulty is too high. Even if we throw all our lives away and use all our trump cards, I'm afraid we still won't be able to pose a threat to the boss. Do you still wish to continue fighting? Wildfighter asked as he turned to Shifeng, who had just rejoined the team. At the same time though, he could not help but sigh in disappointment. They had gone through great lengths to reach the trial boss. If there were a chance of success, he would want to try raiding the trial boss as well. However, no matter how he looked at the situation, he simply couldn't see any hope whatsoever. After all, if they wished to raid the ancient lich, they would need to destroy the 4 mana towers first. Otherwise, they would be no different from live targets for the ancient lich, unable to put up any resistance at all. However, destroying the 4 mana towers was easier said than done. After all, they would have to go up against the trial boss and several thousand trial monsters when attacking the mana towers. To make matters worse, the mana towers possessed incredibly strong defensive capabilities. Attacks below the Tier 4 standard wouldn't even scratch the towers. However, with the 4 mana towers suppressing all hostile forces within the vicinity, they wouldn't be able to use any skills or spells against the towers. In other words, they would have to use normal attacks against these mana towers while also having weakened basic attributes. In such a situation, how many players on the team could execute attacks reaching the Tier 4 standard? If they had to rely on only a handful of players to destroy the 4 mana towers, it was unlikely that they could destroy even 1 mana tower before they team wiped. Not to mention, the mana towers would also periodically launch large-scale destruction spells. Just one of these spells would be more than enough to annihilate their team. Facing the simultaneous attacks of 4 mana towers was an absolute nightmare. Guild Leader Black Flame, if you're reluctant to give up, I can suggest to the guild to alter our agreement to clearing the elite trial instead of the hero trial. Only, the slots you will receive at that time will be significantly reduced. What do you think? Crimson Star suggested. Wildfighter did not show any disagreement with Crimson Star's proposal. The strength Zero Wing had displayed during the trial truly exceeded their imaginations. For Violet Sword, being able to form a partnership with Zero Wing was definitely a good thing. Crimson Star really reacted quickly. Duan Hans smiled faintly when he overheard Crimson Star's suggestion. However, he wasn't particularly surprised. Zero Wing's potential was already clear for all to see. If nothing untoward happened, it would definitely grow into a superpower in the future. The guild would be especially powerful due to its ability to nurture players. If Violet Sword's young talents could receive Zero Wing's training as well, Violet Sword might even have a chance to become one of the 5 great super guilds. After seeing Crimson Star's actions, Duan Hans also felt the need to have the Azure Chamber of Commerce further deepen its relationship with Zero Wing. However, as soon as Crimson Star finished speaking, Shi Feng shook his head. If the problem is with the slots, I can try to negotiate with the others in the guild. Guild Leader Black Flame, Wildfighter said when he saw Shi Feng shaking his head. No, you misunderstand me, Vice Commander Wildfighter. I don't have any problem with your proposal. Only I still wish to challenge the boss. After all, it wasn't easy getting up to this point. It is such a waste to give up without even trying, Shi Feng said. Setting aside the status they would gain in the ancient city after clearing the hero trial, just the ancient legacy steel's recorded information alone made raiding the trial boss imperative. After all, the chances of coming across an ancient legacy steel in God's domain were abysmally low, not to mention one that required such a large memory crystal. If he could get his hands on the recorded information, it would most likely be the greatest harvest from this hero trial. Hence, he naturally couldn't give up without a fight. But those mana towers, Crimson Star countered worriedly when she saw that Shi Feng still wished to attempt the raid. What if we can destroy those mana towers within a short time? Shi Feng asked after giving the matter some thought. Destroy those towers within a short time? Shi Feng's words threw Crimson Star for a loop. Skeptical, she asked, is that possible? The odds are roughly even, Shi Feng said after making some mental calculations. Upon hearing Shi Feng's words, everyone present stared at him in astonishment. For a moment they thought that Shi Feng was joking with them. These were 4 mana towers they were talking about. Destroying one without using any skills or spells would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. How could they destroy all 4 of them within a short time? If you really have an even chance of success, then we can give your plan a try, Crimson Star said as she turned to study the distant altar. Wildfighter nodded in agreement. The most troublesome part about this entire raid was the 4 mana towers. If it was possible to destroy the 4 mana towers quickly, then an attempt was indeed justified. Since everyone agrees, that makes things simple, Shi Feng said, smiling when he saw that Crimson Star and Wildfighter were willing to try raiding the trial boss. Afterward, I'll personally destroy the 4 mana towers. During this period, I hope that you can keep the trial monsters busy. You'll destroy the 4 mana towers yourself? Crimson Star gaped at Shi Feng in disbelief. Although Shi Feng's attacks indeed carried power at the Tier 4 standard, the amount of time it would take him to destroy the mana towers on his own was no laughing matter. That's right. I'll destroy them, Shi Feng replied seriously while nodding. Alright then. Since you wish to try, then let's try it, Guild Leader Black Flame. Crimson Star sighed helplessly when she saw that he was serious. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. At this point she no longer held any hope of him succeeding. However, she didn't mind letting the Violet Sword members present die once to consolidate Violet Sword's partnership with Zero Wing. After all, aside from the long resurrection time, the death penalty players suffered in the ancient secret land was very low. Following which, everyone present readied themselves for battle and positioned themselves right outside the mana tower's suppression radius. Once they were given the command, they would immediately charge into the battlefield and attract the trial monster's attention. Guild Leader Black Flame, everything's ready. You may start any time. Crimson Star reported to Shi Feng after seeing that everyone was in position. Good. I'll start now. After saying so, Shi Feng unsheathed the abyssal blade and activated Black Dragon's soul. Chapter 2639, Black Dragon King's Might. When Shifeng unsheathed the abyssal blade and activated Black Dragon's soul, the abyssal blade immediately transformed into a cloud of black mist, which then enveloped Shifeng completely before expanding to cover a 60-yard radius around him. Before anyone could react to this strange development, a deafening dragon roar came from the cloud. In the next moment, a 30-meter-tall black dragon leaped out of the black mist, releasing a powerful aura that washed over the crowd. A dragon. Crimson Star and Wildfighter could not help doubting their eyes when they saw the incredibly realistic black dragon before them. The dragon race was one of the apex races in God's domain. Dragons were also a symbol of strength and destruction. Whenever one appeared on the continent of God's domain, turmoil would follow. Now, however, Shifeng had actually transformed himself into a dragon. Moreover, in terms of appearance or life rating, he was exactly the same as a true dragon. The only unfortunate matter was that the dragon that Shifeng had transformed into was only Tier 3. Even so, this was still an astounding ability. After all, a dragon's attributes were far superior to those of existences of the same tier. However, while the Violet Sword and Azure members were astonished by this matter, they were, after all, core experts of their respective guilds and quickly snapped out of their daze. Upon receiving Aqua Rose's command, they promptly charged toward the altar, together with Zero Wings members. As soon as everyone entered the range of the mana towers, the altar's trial monsters detected them. Before they could even get within 300 yards of the altar, the trial monsters had already moved into position, with 500 trial monsters standing resolutely at the bottom of the altar's staircase. The remaining trial monsters positioned themselves on the various steps of the staircase and readied their bows. So long as the intruding players were within their attack range, they would immediately loose their arrows. The 4 mana towers surrounding the altar also started launching magic beams at the team. Immediately, 4 light pillars emerged within the trial tunnel and vaporized everything within range. Fortunately, all the members on the team had spread out. In addition, the mana tower's cannons did not possess a very large AoE. As a result, aside from some unlucky players that had bad positioning, everyone else managed to slip out of the beam attack's AoE in time. Even so, the team had still lost over a dozen players just from that first round of attacks. Upon seeing this, the surviving members of the team gulped nervously, grim expressions settling on their faces. They hadn't even started fighting, yet they had already lost over a dozen members. At this rate, they would most likely get annihilated before they could even kill a trial monster. However, just as a heavy atmosphere descended on the team, a black figure suddenly flew overhead and arrived within 100 yards of a mana tower in the blink of an eye. Seeing this figure, everyone relaxed slightly and breathed out a sigh of relief. Only when Shifeng arrived within 100 yards of the first mana tower, the ancient lich seated at the top of the altar suddenly opened its eyes, the blood-red glow in its hollow eye sockets locking onto him immediately. The lich then extended its hand at the black dragon and started chanting an incantation. Less than a second later, a 2-fold magic array appeared beneath the lich's feet. Speed casting. Crimson Star's complexion darkened when she saw Zorok's spell casting. Zorok originally already possessed incredibly high HP for an ancient lich. Now it was even capable of executing speed casting. Moreover, its speed casting was exceptionally fast. A Tier 4 spell, which usually required 4 or 5 seconds to cast, got completed in less than a second. The lich's casting speed was simply unbelievable. The instant the 2-fold magic array took shape, several hundred ice blades formed around Zorok. The ice blades then tore space as they shot straight at Shifeng. Tier 4 spell Frost Dance. Not only did every one of these ice blades carry power surpassing that of Tier 4 mythic monsters, but they also froze their surroundings completely. As the several hundred ice blades flew toward Shifeng, they transformed their surroundings into a world of frost. Seeing this scene, everyone could not help but grow anxious. Dodging Zorok's attack was virtually impossible. If Shifeng got stuck dealing with the ancient lich's attacks, then he wouldn't even be able to close in on the mana towers. Just when the several hundred ice blades were about to devour Shifeng, he suddenly extended a claw and swiped at the empty space before him. The phantom of a gigantic claw instantly appeared in midair. Holy Annihilation Mana Technique Light Shadow. In the next moment, The gigantic claw tore through the frozen world and transformed the space before Shifeng into a pitch-black void. The several hundred ice blades disappeared completely as if they had never appeared to begin with. He blocked it. So this is Guild Leader Black Flame's true strength? Everyone present was stupefied when they saw the pitch-black void that had formed before the Black Dragon. Those were several hundred ice blades. Every one of those ice blades carried power surpassing that of ordinary mythic monsters. Going up against the ancient lich's attack would be akin to going up against the simultaneous attacks of several hundred mythic monsters. Yet Shifeng had actually nullified all those ice blades with just a single blow. However, before everyone could snap out of their daze, Shifeng flapped his wings and arrived before the nearest mana tower. He then sent a claw smashing into the 60-meter-tall tower. Boom! Along with a thundering explosion, the magic barrier protecting the mana tower shattered. The mana tower itself had also started trembling violently, its original durability of 5,000 instantly decreasing by over 200 points. Crimson Star and the others who were still charging toward the altar nearly had their eyes fall out of their sockets when they saw this. The mana tower's defensive capability was at the Tier 4 standard. In other words, non-Tier 4 attacks wouldn't harm the mana tower at all. Even if a Tier 3 attack managed to cause damage, it would at most reduce the tower's durability by the standard 20 points. Now, however, Shifeng had reduced the mana tower's durability by over 200 points with just one attack. The power he demonstrated was simply astonishing. At this moment, let alone Crimson Star and the others, even Shifeng himself was surprised by this situation. Transforming into a Black Dragon King actually elevated my strength to such an extent? When Shifeng saw that the torn space before him was not showing any signs of recovery, he determined that the power of his attack had indeed reached the advanced Tier 4 standard. Before he had transformed into a Black Dragon King, his basic attributes allowed him to exhibit power at only the basic Tier 4 standard. However, in God's domain, further elevating one's power after reaching the Tier 4 standard was incredibly difficult. Only by being capable of exhibiting power at the advanced Tier 4 standard would one be able to just barely reach the standard of superior mythics. In other words, even without using any techniques, he could currently contend against the weakest of superior mythics. Despite this astonishing discovery, Shifeng quickly recovered his senses and resumed attacking the mana tower before him. -224. -219. -222. As Shifeng's claws landed on the mana tower one after another, the tower's durability rapidly decreased. In no time at all, the mana tower had already lost 1/5 of its total durability, the speed of its deterioration making Crimson Star and the others' blood boil. At this time, though, both the mana towers and the ancient lich launched counterattacks at Shifeng. Immediately, the 4 mana towers fired their magic cannons at Shifeng, while the ancient lich used its domain and over a dozen magic blades to restrict and attack him. Every one of the attacks sent at Shifeng carried the power of a superior mythic. Not daring to be careless, Shifeng continued using Light Shadow to defend himself before resuming his bombardment of the mana tower before him. However, Light Shadow placed an enormous burden on Shifeng's concentration. Even after he transformed into a Black Dragon King and gained a much superior physique, the amount of concentration he consumed when executing Light Shadow hardly decreased. By the time Shifeng had destroyed the second mana tower, he no longer dared to use Light Shadow to defend against the mana towers and ancient lich's attacks, opting to use Sword's Orbit instead. However, the boost in power Sword's Orbit provided was inferior to that from Light Shadow. As a result, Shifeng continuously lost HP as he defended himself. Approaching and attacking the mana towers also became much more difficult. By the time Shifeng destroyed the third mana tower, his HP had already fallen to 64%. At this point, Zorok's attacks became even more frenzied. And when Shifeng started attacking the fourth mana tower, the ancient lich also started double speed casting and dishing out Tier 4 spells like they were nothing. When Shifeng's HP fell to 24%, the fourth and last mana tower's durability zeroed out. At the same time, the suppression on the space surrounding the altar disappeared, and everyone was free to use skills and spells again. Zorok grew thoroughly enraged upon seeing the fourth mana tower's destruction. Damnable dragon! Die! Zorok bellowed as it glared at Shifeng. The world around Shifeng immediately dimmed as a gigantic threefold magic array appeared above his head. A Tier 4 curse? Shifeng's complexion darkened when he saw the threefold magic array. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. As he stared at it in shock, flames of annihilation suddenly descended from the threefold magic array, covering a 500-yard radius and enveloping the entire altar. Tier 4 curse, Annihilation Lotus. The faces of Crimson Star and the others sank at this sight. Shatter. Not daring to hold back, Shifeng immediately widened his mouth and used his strongest move, Dragon Breath. Chapter 2640. Suppressing the Ancient Lich. Dragon Breath. The dragon race's trademark move allowed dragons to gather all their power into a single point and propel it. The resulting attack would carry power far beyond what dragons could normally exhibit. Dragon Breath was also one of the main reasons why dragons were labeled invincible among those of the same tier. A Tier 5 Dragon Breath could even destroy entire cities. The destructive power a Dragon Breath carried was even greater than a taboo skill or curse of the same tier. After Shifeng executed Dragon Breath, a scorching white beam shot at the massive pillar of flames descending from the sky. When the two attacks collided, space around the point of collision shattered and transformed into a pitch-black void. The powerful shockwaves from the impact were palpable even over 1,000 yards away. When the clash ended, everyone was stupefied by the outcome. What? He blocked it. That was a Tier 4 curse. Even a true Tier 3 dragon shouldn't be able to stop that. How did he do it? Crimson Star and the other magical class players on the team felt like they were dreaming when they saw the threefold magic array above them fading out of existence. The Tier 4 curse Zorok cast rivaled a Tier 5 spell. Meanwhile, a Tier 5 spell could break through even the defensive magic array of main cities, let alone annihilate a measly 200-man team of Tier 3 players. When they saw Zorok casting the Tier 4 curse, they had known that the battle was over and resigned themselves to death. None of them thought that Shifeng would actually be able to stop this frightening attack and keep the whole team alive. His abilities were truly inhuman. Thank goodness I managed to block it. Otherwise that really would have been a team wipe. Shifeng breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw the descending pillar of flames dissipating. If not for him having further improved his understanding of the realms of truth and managing to integrate advanced combat techniques into his actions, he wouldn't have been able to elevate his Dragon Breath's destructive power. In that case, both he and everyone else below him would have been burnt to ashes. However, before Shifeng and the others could catch their breath, Zorok started chanting once more and summoned another threefold magic array. How is this possible? This is a lie, right? How can it still use another Tier 4 curse? Everyone's complexion paled when they saw the Ancient Lich using another Tier 4 curse. Most of the bosses in God's domain possessed only one team wipe move. And even if a boss had multiple team wipe moves, it wouldn't use them back to back. Now, however, Zorok was chanting another Tier 4 curse right after using one. The Ancient Lich thoroughly shattered the conventions of God's domain. It's not even waiting for the ambient mana to recover. At this moment, let alone everyone else, even Shifeng was surprised by this situation. He was not surprised that Zorok was using Tier 4 curses back to back. After all, the Ancient Lich was a magically oriented boss. However, Zorok had just used a Tier 4 curse, so the mana around it was still extremely sparse. If the Lich used another Tier 4 curse now, the power of the curse would be significantly weaker. Zorok should have waited for the ambient mana to recover before using another killing move, yet the Lich did not do so. Even for Shifeng, this was a fresh development. It's over. Its casting speed is too fast. We don't even have time to use Tier 3 curses to defend ourselves. Crimson Star despaired when she saw the fully formed threefold magic array. She never thought that after Shifeng destroyed the 4 mana towers and blocked one of the Ancient Lich's killing moves, things would turn out this way. With Dragon Breath on cooldown, it should not be possible for Shifeng to use it again within a short time. In addition, he was simply too far away from Zorok. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't interrupt the Ancient Lich's spell casting. Meanwhile, the formation of a Tier 3 curse took at least 3 or 4 seconds. They simply didn't have enough time to defend against the Ancient Lich's second attack. Just as Zorok was about to incant the final verse of its curse, however, A lithe figure suddenly appeared before it and slashed her great sword down at the lich. In the next moment, a flash dazzled everyone's eyes as the great sword smashed into the ancient lich's skull. Not only did the attack forcefully interrupt the ancient lich's spellcasting, but it also made the lich itself stumble 2 steps back, suffering over 4 million damage. Gentle Snow. Over 4 million damage. How high is her strength? Violet Swords and Azure's members were surprised when they disowned the identity of the ancient lich's attacker. They never thought that Zero Wing actually had another expert capable of contending against the ancient lich. While the ancient lich was indeed a magically oriented boss, the basic attributes it possessed were still far superior to ordinary mythic monsters. Without strength surpassing that of ordinary mythic monsters, one wouldn't be able to budge the ancient lich in the slightest. Meanwhile, after Gentle Snow interrupted Zorak, Shurfeng immediately flew forward to keep it busy. He gave the lich no opportunities to cast any more Tier 4 curses. Good. Hence. Everyone charge. Wildfighter yelled excitedly when he saw the ancient lich occupied. Now that the mana towers were gone, so long as the ancient lich was prevented from using any more Tier 4 curses and they could get within melee range of it, they would have an opportunity for victory. After all, what magically oriented bosses feared the most was melee combat. So long as they managed to pull Zorak into a melee, the boss's threat would be halved. Violet Swords and Azure's members charged at the trial monster's defensive line with renewed vigor. Taking the lead, Wildfighter, Crimson Star, Sinful Flame, Duan Hans Han, Solitary Frost, Yen Xiaoqian and Floating Light were like the team's spearhead. They instantly broke a hole through the defensive line and allowed the team's other members to flood through it. However, the higher up the altar the team ascended, the more trial monsters they encountered. As a result, the team's advance gradually slowed. Damn it! There are too many trial elites. At this rate, we'll get killed before we can even close with the boss. Floating Light cursed as he fought 3 Grand Lord ranked trial elites simultaneously. Previously, he still had the upper hand when he went up against 2 trial elites. However, as they ascended the altar, the number of trial elites they came across increased. Now, facing the simultaneous attacks of 3 trial elites, he didn't even have the opportunity to retaliate and could only passively defend himself. His HP also continuously decreased and he needed the support of the healers in order to stay alive. At this moment, everyone was struggling in their fight against the trial monsters, their HPs continuously decreasing. Now they were completely reliant on the team's healers to keep their HPs above a safe margin. We can't continue dragging the fight out like this. Violet and Wonder, you two open up a path. Everyone else follow them. I'll hold the rear. Aqua Rose commanded when she saw that the team was already surrounded. Follow the 2 of them? The Violet Sword and Azure members present were confused by Aqua Rose's command. Yen Xiaoqian in particular found it unbelievable. Setting aside Violet Cloud, who held the upper hand even while going up against 3 trial elites simultaneously, Silent Wonder was just barely holding her ground against 3 trial elites. In fact, Yen Xiaoqian was faring even better than Silent Wonder right now, yet Aqua Rose wanted Silent Wonder to spearhead a breakthrough in the encirclement. However, before anyone could object to Aqua Rose's strange command, Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder both nodded and charged toward the thick of the monsters. What are they doing? They're already outside the range of the healers. Crimson Star suspected that Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder had gone crazy when she saw the 2 charging into the mob of trial monsters. Although Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder possessed relatively high combat standards and extraordinary combat power, they would still take significant damage if they went up against too many trial monsters at once. Without the support of healers, they wouldn't last very long. Even if Violet Cloud was a cleric herself, she currently had to focus on attacking and defending. She didn't have any time to spare casting healing spells. However, as soon as Crimson Star finished speaking, blades of mana started appearing around the 2 women. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Void Blade. Shadow Rage. The 2 of them combined had summoned over 300 magic blades. Moreover, every magic blade carried so much power that the space around them trembled. The power of these magic blades was definitely at the Tier 4 standard. Go! Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder let loose a low shout. The trial monsters surrounding them got blasted away one after another, and in no time at all, No monster remained within a 40-yard radius of the duo. Moreover, any monster that tried to approach them got repelled immediately. Chapter 2641 U0 Wings Combat Power. The sudden appearance of empty space on the altar's staircase instantly silenced Violet Sword's and Azure's members. They were holding back all this time? Xianxia could not help doubting her eyes as she stared at Silent Wonder. After fully unlocking her own mana body as well, Xianxia had thought that she had already caught up to and possibly even surpassed Silent Wonder. After all, in terms of combat standards, Silent Wonder had just recently entered the Void Realm, whereas she was only half a step away from the Domain Realm. Now, however, are all of Zero Wings members monsters? Floating Light's eyes were wide with shock as he watched Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder carving a path up the staircase. He already had difficulties taking on 3 trial elites simultaneously, yet Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder currently held the upper hand despite going up against several hundred trial warriors and trial elites. None of the trial monsters could get within 30 yards of the duo. Their strength was simply unbelievable. Even Crimson Star and Wildfighter wouldn't be a match for Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder. Or to put it in another way, they were standing on completely different levels. Good. Everyone enter the clearing they created. Aqua Rose immediately commanded, unfazed by the strength Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder were displaying. Upon hearing Aqua Rose's command, Violet Swords and Azure's members promptly snapped out of their daze and hurriedly followed Zero Wings members into the 30-yard safe zone the duo had created. For a time, the entire team steadily closed in on the Ancient Lich while enveloped by Violet Cloud's and Silent Wonder's attacks, which formed a barrier that prevented the trial monsters from harming the team. Sure enough, the two of them have already achieved a considerably high standard in the spiritualization realm. Every one of their magic blades actually integrates a combat technique. It's as if they've assimilated basic combat techniques into their souls, Sinful Flame muttered as he marveled at the magic blades flying around the team. They've integrated basic combat techniques into every one of their magic blades? How is that possible? Xianxia exclaimed when she overheard Sinful Flame's mutterings. Just executing a combat technique normally was plenty difficult. Executing combat techniques in quick succession was even more difficult. As for executing several hundred combat techniques simultaneously, that was simply inhuman. However, they have indeed succeeded in doing so. In fact, they're doing it as naturally as breathing, Sinful Flame said, a bitter smile forming on his face as he responded to Xianxia's astonishment. Moreover, they aren't the only ones in Zero Wing capable of it. I really don't know how Black Flame managed to nurture so many monsters. As Sinful Flame and Xianxia were conversing, the team arrived within 50 yards of the Ancient Lich under Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder's aegis. However, as the team pressed closer to the Ancient Lich, the magic blades Violet Cloud and Silent Wonder summoned grew increasingly translucent. It was obvious that their duration would end soon. Seeing this, everyone on the team inevitably grew nervous. While being closer to the trial boss was a good thing, the number of trial monsters around the boss greatly exceeded their expectations. If they lost the protection of these magic blades now, they definitely wouldn't be able to fend off the trial monsters. Everyone gather around the boss and focus fire on it. Summer and I will hold the rear. Aqua Rose shouted through the team chat when she saw that the magic blades were about to vanish. She then rushed to the rear of the team. Everyone was stunned by Aqua Rose's words. Although the altar staircase was only 60 yards wide, which a magical class player could easily cover so long as they stood in the middle, they would be up against several thousand trial monsters. Let alone 2 magical class players, even 100 magical class players couldn't stop the assault of so many monsters. Normally, the majority of the team would hold off the trial monsters while a small number of peak experts dealt with the boss. Now, however, Aqua Rose intended to stop these several thousand trial monsters with just 2 people. She was simply insane. However, before Crimson Star and Wildfighter could offer up their suggestion, Aqua Rose had already started incanting. A dark blue 2-fold magic array, angled toward the staircase, immediately appeared above her. When she tapped the butt of her staff on the ground, a torrent of water gushed out of the magic array and down the altar's staircase. The frightening deluge flushed the trial monsters down the staircase. After the floodwaters swept away the trial monsters, alluring Summer, who stood beside Aqua Rose, also completed her incantation. An electric barrier formed at the top of the staircase, preventing ingress. However, while the electric barrier stopped the trial monster's advance, it did not block the trial monster's attacks. For a time, every trial monster could be seen firing arrows at Aqua Rose and alluring Summer. Everyone felt their scalp going numb when they saw the rain of several thousand arrows. However, as if they were graceful butterflies, Aqua Rose and alluring Summer easily weaved their way around the arrows. In the end, not a single arrow managed to land on the two of them. Crap. What kind of guild is Zero Wing? Floating Light gaped in shock when he saw Aqua Rose and alluring Summer stopping the advance of several thousand trial monsters all by themselves. At this moment, let alone Floating Light, even Solitary Frost and Zhou Xian, who had lived together with Zero Wing's members for a while, were shocked by this scene. They felt as if this was their first time learning of the guild known as Zero Wing. Everyone stop daydreaming. We need to help guild leader Black Flame deal with the boss quickly. Crimson Star ordered through the team chat after snapping out of her daze. Upon hearing Crimson Star's reminder, Violet Swords and Azure's members also promptly regained their composure. Indeed, now wasn't the time to watch Aqua Rose and alluring Summer. Dealing with the Ancient Lich took priority. Everyone else on the team then charged at the Ancient Lich and started assisting Shurfeng and Gentle Snow in dealing with the trial boss. Although Zorak was incredibly powerful, it was, at the end of the day, still a magically oriented monster. After its opponents got within melee range of it, it would be fortunate if it could exhibit even half of its usual combat power. Moreover, with Shurfeng and Gentle Snow's constant harassment, Zorak couldn't even cast Tier 4 AoE spells, let alone Tier 4 curses. The Ancient Lich's HP decreased rapidly. Even after Shurfeng reverted into a human, Zorak's HP still dwindled. After a little more than an hour had passed, the Ancient Lich's HP had already fallen to 20%. Despicable humans. I will have all of you pay for daring to interrupt a sacrifice for the demon god. Zorak bellowed. A frightening burst of mana exploded forth from the Ancient Lich's body, the shockwave so intense that everyone present got knocked back more than 30 yards. Not good. It's going to use the innate skill of liches. Crimson Star turned solemn when she saw the Ancient Lich going berserk. Everyone, distance yourself from the boss quickly. In God's domain, every powerful race had their own innate skills. An example would be the dragon race's Dragon Breath. Another would be Lich's Frozen World. Not only was this skill incredibly powerful, but it also could not be interrupted. So long as Frozen World was activated, anyone within range who did not have extremely high ice resistance would receive frost damage over time, as well as a movement speed debuff. Fortunately, Frozen World had a small AoE with a 40-yard radius. Ranged players could easily attack from outside the AoE. However, being able to use only ranged attacks against a magically oriented boss wasn't a good thing. Don't even think of getting off so easily. Shurfeng shouted as he activated the 7 Luminaries' Ring's Forbidden Domain. A layer of grey fog enveloped the entire altar, and the frightening mana surrounding Zorak scattered and disappeared. As a result, the Ancient Lich failed to gather enough mana to activate Frozen World. In the end, not only did Zorak not become more difficult to deal with, but it even became weaker instead. With the suppression of Forbidden Domain, the Ancient Lich could cast only Tier 3 spells. This reduced the raid difficulty significantly. 20%, 15%, 10%. However, as the battle progressed, Zorak also grew increasingly desperate. In exchange for reducing its own defense and HP, it started using Tier 4 spells in rapid succession, reaping the lives of the players before it. By the time the Ancient Lich's HP fell to 5%, less than 100 players remained alive. Fortunately, the damage everyone caused the Lich was also increasing. Moreover, the Lich kept burning its own HP to do battle. As a result, the Lich's HP still decreased at a rapid rate. Quick! Attack with everything you've got. The boss is almost down. Crimson Star shouted anxiously when she saw that the team was down to less than 70 players. At this moment she could tell that the rate at which Zorak's HP decreased was slowing. Even though the Ancient Lich only had 3% of its HP left, that was still more than 100 million HP. To make matters worse, everyone's strongest skills and spells were on cooldown. They didn't have anything left to increase their DPS. 2%, 1%. When Zorok's HP fell below 1%, less than 20 players remained. At this point, aside from Kola, everyone else's HP was already at a critical level. Everyone was clearly at the end of their rope. Shifeng decided to throw caution to the wind. He arrived beside the ancient lich and raised the abyssal blade high. Die. First sword light shadow. 2 attacks. 3 attacks. Every attack inflicted over 3 million damage on the ancient lich. However, every execution of light shadow gave Shifeng a massive headache. When he executed the mana technique for the 3rd time in a row, his complexion had already turned deathly pale. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Nevertheless, Shifeng endured the pain and continued executing light shadow. 5 attacks. 6 attacks. 7 attacks. Finally, after Shifeng executed his 8th consecutive light shadow, Zorok's HP zeroed out. The ancient lich then let loose an unresigned wail before collapsing to the ground. Chapter 2642, Ancient Lich's Loot. When the ancient lich collapsed to the ground, a purple glow enveloped the bodies of the surviving players. The EXP from the ancient lich was far more generous than what even ordinary superior mythics awarded, so much that Shifeng jumped directly to level 120. As everyone's experience bar was rising rapidly, due to the ancient lich's death, the boundless mana that had gathered around the altar no longer had anyone binding it to the altar's vicinity. As a result, the mana started dispersing, and the trial monsters that were frenziedly attacking Aqua Rose and Alluring Summer suddenly collapsed to the ground, one after another as if they had lost their souls. We won. An indescribable sense of joy and excitement welled up within Aqua Rose when she saw the collapsed trial monsters. At the same time, a sense of relief washed over her. Although both Alluring Summers and her HPs had barely decreased, their stamina and concentration were already at critical levels. Had the fight continued for another 2 or 3 minutes, they would definitely have collapsed from stamina and concentration exhaustion. Fortunately, the ancient lich had fallen before they did. In the meantime, although Shifeng and the others felt joyful over defeating the ancient lich, they could not help falling on their backs in exhaustion, having almost depleted their stamina and concentration already. The hero trial. He actually did it. When Mythology's people find out about this, they will definitely go crazy. Crimson Star gazed at Shifeng, who lay on the ground some distance away with complicated emotions. Originally, Tori had only meant to use the hero trial as bait to buy time. No one from Violet Sword had expected Shifeng and Zero Wing to succeed. After all, Mythology had partnered with multiple superpowers to form a 200-man team of peak and apex experts and still failed to conquer the ancient city's elite trial. While fighting the ancient lich, Crimson Star had entertained the possibility of actually defeating the trial boss. But toward the end of the raid, she had concluded that victory was nothing but a fantasy. Near the end, Zorok had started killing multiple players with every move it used. The ancient lich would wipe out the remnants of their team in 10 seconds. Meanwhile, trying to wreak over 40 million damage in just 10 seconds was simply impossible for a team of less than 20 surviving players. In the end, however, Shifeng had surpassed everyone's expectations. At the final moment, he still managed to dish out such frightening DPS and reap the ancient lich's remaining HP, creating a miracle. Guild leader, are you all right? Fire Dance asked worriedly as she arrived beside Shifeng. At this moment, the life aura Shifeng exuded was incredibly weak despite him still having quite a lot of HP. His complexion was also deathly pale. This clearly wasn't a result of just running out of stamina or concentration. I'm fine. I just forcefully broke through the limits of my concentration, so I'll probably need to rest for quite some time to recover, Shifeng replied, smiling. Because of his rapid-fire use of light shadow, he was mentally exhausted. In fact, he would most likely remain in this weakened mental state for quite some time. However, being able to break through the limits of his concentration was a fortuitous matter. After all, it would allow him to improve his brain capacity. Of course, in order to gain this improvement, he would need the corresponding support facilities and nutrient fluids. Otherwise, he would be courting brain damage. While Shifeng and Fire Dance were conversing, the sound of a system notification entered everyone's ears. System, congratulations. You have completed the hero trial. Trial completion rating, S rank. rewarding 500 light-forged city contribution points and permanent citizenship. The system notification repeated 3 times. While Zero Wings and Azure's members did not understand the importance of these rewards, Violet Sword's members revealed ecstatic expressions on their faces. What a bountiful reward! According to our investigations of Lightforged City, it'd take at least 7 or 8 quests just to get 100 contribution points. With 500 points, we can directly purchase 3 Tier 3 magic stones and attempt to boost the completion rate of our Tier 3 skills and spells past the 100% threshold. Floating Light exclaimed. As he read the contents of the system notification, he felt as if he was dreaming. Although neither Violet Sword nor Mythology had entered the ancient secret lands Lightforged City before, their research into the city indicated that obtaining contribution points in the city was incredibly difficult. Normally, the only way was by doing quest. However, there was not only a restriction of accepting 1 quest at a time but also a limited number of quests available in the city every day. Meanwhile, Lightforged City's contribution points were the only currency recognized in the city. These points could be exchanged for various useful items. Among the items available for exchange in Lightforged City, the one that attracted the attention of Violet Sword and Mythology the most was the Magic Stone. The Magic Stone was an item that could provide players with guidance on breaking through the 100% limit of their skills and spells. A Tier 3 Magic Stone could provide guidance for Tier 3 skills and spells. It was undoubtedly a treasure that all expert players desired. After all, skills and spells followed players for the rest of their careers in God's domain. However, improving the completion rate of skills and spells, especially Tier 3 skills and spells, was not an easy task. Just being able to achieve a 90% completion rate was already an incredibly difficult feat to accomplish. Meanwhile, even reaching 100% completion rate with a Tier 3 skill or spell would provide a considerable boost to a player's combat power. If one could break through the 100% limit, the boost in combat power would be even greater. Now that the hero trial had awarded each player with 500 contribution points, this meant each of them could exchange for 3 Tier 3 magic stones. They were naturally excited by this outcome. At this moment, let alone Violet Sword's members, even Shurfeng was surprised by this reward. A 500-point reward for every player on the team? This trip really was worth it. Shurfeng similarly felt joyful when he saw the rewards the system granted. Others might not know what it meant to have 500 contribution points for an ancient city, but he did. In God's domain, a player who managed to rack up 500 contribution points in an ancient city could improve their combat power by a significant margin. Setting aside the commonly known magic stone, just the most basic enchanted potion could allow players to improve their strength rapidly. When consumed, the enchanted potion raised the ambient mana around players to a very high density for 6 hours. If players fought against powerful monsters or sparred against expert players during this period, they would gain significant improvements. In the past, because of the magic stone and enchanted potion, Violet Sword had been able to recruit and nurture plenty of expert players, which in turn raised the guild's strength even closer to that of the 5 great super guilds. As Shurfeng and the others were rejoicing over the trial rewards, the ancient lich's corpse suddenly burst into countless particles of light. Immediately afterward, the particles of light coalesced into more than 100 light globes of varying sizes, every one of which radiated dense mana. So, this is the ancient lich's loot? Everyone gaped in shock when they saw the items that appeared when the light globes faded. Although everyone had anticipated that the ancient lich's loot would be extraordinary, they never thought it would be this abundant. Originally, they had only expected to obtain around 24 noble authority tokens. However, there were over 60 tokens as well as over 20 inferior legendary materials and 6 legendary materials. Aside from the tokens and materials, the ancient lich had also dropped a total of 14 pieces of dark gold equipment and 4 pieces of epic equipment. At this point in time, even the various superpowers barely had any level 100 plus epic items. Now, however, the ancient lich had dropped 4 level 100 plus epic items, including an epic weapon. Azure's members could not help but drool over the ancient lich's loot. The 4 epic items aside, just the legendary materials dropped were more than enough to make any superpower envious. After all, legendary materials could be used to produce custom-made epic weapons and equipment that had high compatibility with the players they were made for. Moreover, the production would also have a relatively high success rate. With the 6 legendary materials dropped, it was possible to create 6 custom-made epic weapons and equipment. Guild Leader Black Flame, according to our agreement, you have priority in choosing one item. Please take your pick, Crimson Star said to Shifeng after recollecting herself. In that case, I'll choose that tattered scroll, Shifeng said, pointing at a tattered scroll radiating mana so dense that it was second only to the mana from the epic weapon. Guild Leader Black Flame, are you sure? Crimson Star looked at Shifeng in confusion when she saw the item he chose. In her opinion, the best item the ancient lich dropped was the epic ranked axe. After all, the axe wasn't just any ordinary epic weapon but the replica of a legendary weapon, ranking at the top even among epic weapons. When equipped, it could raise the combat power of current peak experts by at least 30%. It should be of great help even to domain realm experts like herself. As for the tattered scroll Shifeng chose, she had tried using an identification skill on it already. Although the scroll radiated powerful mana and looked very special, it was just a damaged epic scroll. The cost of repair alone would most likely be high. Not to mention a scroll was also a consumable. How could it possibly compare to an epic weapon in terms of value? I'm choosing it, Shifeng said as he nodded in affirmation. At this stage of the game, aside from himself, there was most likely nobody else in God's domain that would recognize this tattered scroll. This scroll was also the reason why he wanted priority pick over the trial boss's loot. This was because this scroll was something that could be obtained only from the first clear of Lightforged City's entrance trial. The Legacy Scroll. This magic scroll directly teleported players to the legacy land of their Tier 4 promotion quest, saving them plenty of time. In addition, it could be used to negate a failed attempt at challenging the Tier 4 promotion quest, allowing players to re-challenge their promotion quest right away in the same legacy land. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Tier 4 promotion quest was drastically different from past promotion quests. Every time players challenged their Tier 4 promotion quest, they would be sent to a different legacy land. Hence, players had no opportunity to learn from their failures and try again. However, if they could re-attempt a promotion quest in the same legacy land, their chances of success would increase drastically. Only, the legacy scroll the ancient lich dropped was somewhat different from what Shifeng had heard in his previous life. In the past, the legacy scroll obtained from Lightforged City's entrance trial was at the dark gold rank. On the other hand, the one the ancient lich dropped was actually at the epic rank. However, Shifeng did not dwell on the matter, quickly storing the legacy scroll. And after splitting the loot equally with Violet's sword, Shifeng and the others promptly left the trial space. Once they exited the trial space, they entered Lightforged City under Crimson Star's lead, not bothering to wait at the trial entrance for the dead to get automatically resurrected. Chapter 2643, Astonishing Lightforged City Ancient Secret Land, Lightforged City. With a flash, Shifeng and the other survivors of his team arrived in the middle of a plaza. The plaza was gigantic, easily able to house 4 sports stadiums. Erected in its center were more than 107-meter-tall statues. Every one of these statues had a different appearance. Some were armor-clad warriors, some staff-wielding mages, and some archers sporting bows. Despite their different appearances, these statues shared one similarity: a powerful aura. It felt as if these statues were alive. Upon seeing these statues, Shifeng and the others were stunned. This ancient city is truly amazing. Just the statues in this teleportation plaza would most likely be enough to drive the experts in the outside world crazy, Shifeng exclaimed as he studied the statues before him. The statues on the plaza might look ordinary, but in reality, they contained information on basic combat techniques catering to the class they represented. At this point in time, practically every player in God's domain already knew about the existence of combat techniques. However, the number of players that had the opportunity to learn a combat technique was still incredibly low. This was especially true for independent players. However, inside Lightforged City, information on basic combat techniques was on display as if it was worthless garbage. Players could freely learn the combat techniques displayed whenever they wanted and at no cost at all. Moreover, these combat techniques catered to specific classes. The wealth and generosity of Lightforged City were truly astonishing. At this stage of the game, Even the members of the various major powers had to pay a certain price and make sufficient contributions in order to learn basic combat techniques, yet players could freely learn them in this plaza. Furthermore, the ambient mana inside Lightforged City was also incredibly dense. If players trained in Lightforged City's arenas, their improvement speed would definitely be several times higher than normal. The mana here is very special. If I can train here long-term, I might be able to further unlock my mana body, Violet Cloud said excitedly through the team chat. Indeed. Just standing here I can already feel my control over mana strengthening. If I can take advantage of this experience, I might be able to further unlock my mana body as well, Aqua Rose said, nodding. Everyone else in the team had also noticed the special effects of Lightforged City's mana, their eyes glowing with excitement at this discovery. 4 Violet Swords, Crimson Star and Wild Fighter. Nothing was more attractive than being able to fully unlock their mana bodies as soon as possible. Or to put it in another way, expediting the unlocking of the mana body was something the various superpowers were constantly seeking to accomplish. As for Zero Wings members and Azure's Sinful Flame, Solitary Frost, and Xianxia, breaking through the mana body's 100% threshold was something they dreamed of achieving. After all, the difference between a mana body that had broken through the 100% threshold and a mana body that had yet to do so was massive, as Violet Cloud had proven. However, trying to break through the mana body's 100% threshold was incredibly difficult. In fact, they hardly had any leads on doing so. Now that the mana here was giving them some clues, they naturally grew excited. In this situation though, Sinful Flame, Solitary Frost, and Xianxia could not help envying Zero Wings and Violet Swords members. After all, Zero Wings and Violet Swords members could train in Lightforged City whenever they wanted. On the other hand, Azure's members had only 2 days. 1. Upon realizing this, Xianxia and Solitary Frost took a seat and focused on the sensations they were currently experiencing. After all, it was unknown when they would get another opportunity to visit Lightforged City. There's still quite some time before the alchemy array disappears. Let's take a look at Lightforged City's City Lord's mansion first. It won't be too late to start training afterward, Shifeng suggested, chuckling when he saw Xianxia and the others sitting down to circulate their mana. I guess you're right, Xianxia answered, nodding as she dismissed her thoughts of training immediately. Upon further consideration, she felt that what Shifeng said was indeed correct. The special effects of the ancient city's mana could be said to be a bonus only. The true value of the city remained in its City Lord's mansion, where players could exchange for the various items available only in the ancient city, using the city's contribution points. Currently, every one of them had 500 contribution points. It would be a pity not to use them. Shifeng and the others spent over 2 hours traveling down Lightforged City's main street before arriving in front of the 600-meter-tall City Lord's mansion. Currently, dozens of uniformed knights were standing guard before the entrance of the City Lord's mansion. Not only were these knights at level 180 Tier 3, but they also possessed life ratings rivaling that of archaic species. The aura they radiated was comparable with that of mythic monsters of the same level. As for the knight captain leading these knights, he was a bona fide Tier 4 NPC. His mere presence put intense pressure on Shifeng. Meanwhile, when everyone entered the City Lord's mansion's first-floor exchange hall, they were stunned by the scene before them. Currently, all sorts of items were on display in the exchange hall. Among them were epic weapon and equipment designs, Grandmaster potion recipes, rare skills and spells, bronze combat techniques, advanced construction designs and designs for war weapons. Every one of these items was an unbelievable treasure that one could only come across by luck in the outside world. Now, however, a plethora of such treasures greeted their eyes. Of course, everyone could only afford to look at these items. After all, even the cheapest of these displayed treasures cost 4,000 contribution points, with the more expensive ones costing tens of thousands of points. With each of them having only 500 points, they shouldn't even think of purchasing any of these items. Fortunately, these valuable treasures weren't the only things available for exchange. There were still plenty of cheap and ordinary items within their means. An example of these items would be the magic stone and enchanted potion. Of those present, whether it was Violet Swords or Azure's members, They almost immediately chose to spend all of their contribution points on the Tier 3 magic stones and enchanted potions. Guild leader, the items available for exchange here have limited quantities. Let's quickly exchange for some Tier 3 magic stones and enchanted potions as well. If we wait until the others get resurrected, there won't be anything left for us, Aqua Rose urged hurriedly as she looked at Shifeng, who showed no interest in the magic stones and enchanted potions at all. All items in the exchange hall had an exchange limit. While some would be restocked over time, the more valuable treasures were unique items, no longer available once exchanged. As for the Tier 3 magic stones and enchanted potions, while they weren't unique items, if everyone were to spend all 500 of their contribution points on these two items, there would only be enough to supply 50 people. Once these items sold out, those who wanted them would have to wait until they got restocked to exchange for these items. However, who knew when these items would get restocked? No need to rush this, Shifeng said, shaking his head. He then shifted his gaze to a shelf carrying bottles of icy blue liquid, saying, "Have everyone exchange for 10 master concentration recovery potions first." Guild leader, that concentration recovery potion is too expensive at 50 points per bottle. Do we really need to buy it? Aqua Rose could not help her exasperation when she saw the price of the Master Concentration Recovery Potion. That item only aids players in recovering concentration. Moreover, each potion lasts only 2 hours. Although it is a rare potion in the outside world, spending our precious points on it is a little... Concentration recovery potions were indeed incredibly rare but not particularly useful since players naturally recovered their concentration over time. If players rested inside a city, their recovery rate would be even quicker. Hence, items that helped in the recovery of concentration were not that expensive on the market. Spending 50 contribution points to exchange for just one master concentration recovery potion now was simply an extravagance. After all, the master enchanted potion cost only 10 contribution points, yet it lasted 6 hours. Relax. Just exchange all your points for the potion. I guarantee that the value you can get from these potions will greatly surpass your expectations. They're even more valuable than those Tier 3 magic stones, Shifeng said, chuckling when he saw the anxious look on Aqua Rose's face. In his opinion, the Master Concentration Recovery Potion was very cheap. Moreover, they were allowed to purchase the potion only because they had the Noble Authority token. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the qualifications to do so. If these Master Concentration Recovery Potions were put up for sale during his previous life, just one potion would have sold for the price of one epic material. Even at such a price, rarely anybody would be willing to sell their potions. After saying so, Shifeng spent all his points on Master Concentration Recovery Potions without hesitation. Aqua Rose no longer tried to dissuade Shifeng. After all, he definitely had his reasons for such a decision. Following which, she and the others exchanged all their points for Master Concentration Recovery Potions as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Violet Swords and Azure's members were confused upon seeing this scene. They could not understand why Zero Wings members would exchange for potions that did not provide the slightest bit of help in training. However, they did not pay too much attention to this matter. After all, their alchemy array's duration was running down. Now that they had obtained the magic stones and enchanted potions, they had to devote their efforts to training. As for what Zero Wings members intended to do, that was none of their business. Violet Swords and Azure's members promptly ran to Lightforge City's arenas to train. As for Zero Wings members, they made their way to the city wall under Shifeng's lead. Let's hope these potions will be enough for me to break through to the Tier 4 standard. As Shifeng gazed at the gigantic statues atop the distant wall, his footsteps sped up automatically. Chapter 2644. Absorbing Divine. While the gigantic statues erected atop Lightforge City's tall walls gave off an indescribable sense of majesty and oppression. When Shifeng and the other Zero Wing members got within 100 yards of these statues, they immediately sensed a powerful pressure weighing down on their minds. For a moment they felt as if their bodies no longer belonged to themselves as their consciousness started to waver. They were like a small boat sailing across a stormy ocean. Even the slightest mistake could result in their demise. What a powerful mental assault. Just this one strike already makes me feel as if I just executed an advanced combat technique. If this continues, I'll probably exhaust my concentration in no time at all, Gentle Snow commented, frowning as she sensed the mental pressure from the statues. She had realized that these statues were extraordinary when she saw them from outside the city. After all, just looking at these statues from a great distance had already taken a toll on her concentration. Now that she stood so close to these statues, she realized that they were even more frightening than she initially thought. Even without looking at these statues, her mind was subject to a mental suppression that depleted her concentration. Guild leader, don't tell me the training you mentioned will take place here? Aqua Rose objected as she turned to Shifeng. That's right. We'll be training here, Shifeng said as he smiled and nodded. Guild leader, the mental assault of these statues is too powerful. Let alone using skills and spells, even executing basic mana control is a problem. It is impossible for us to conduct any training here, Aqua Rose argued. When she tried manipulating and gathering her mana earlier, the statue's mental assault had interrupted her. The incessant mental assault would make using any skills or spells here impossible. Everyone else nodded in agreement with Aqua Rose's words. It might be fine if the mental assault was something ordinary, but the statue's mental assault threatened to knock them unconscious. Against such a powerful and persistent mental assault, even controlling their physical bodies would be a problem. Rather than waste time here, it would be much better if they went to one of the hotels in the city to practice their mana control. The training efficiency there would be several hundred times better than here. It is indeed difficult to train mana control here, but I didn't bring you all here for that. Instead, we're here to train our concentration, Shifeng explained. Concentration training? How is that possible? Stunned by Shifeng's words, Aqua Rose could not help eyeing him skeptically. At this moment, let alone Aqua Rose, Gentle Snow and the others were likewise dubious, suspecting that Shifeng was joking with them. In God's domain, it was common knowledge that raising the concentration attribute was much more difficult than raising the stamina attribute. Of course, while the difficulty of increasing one's concentration was high, the returns one could gain from improved concentration were also immense, far outstripping those from improved stamina. This was especially true for magical class players and expert players. The help they could gain from the concentration attribute was dozens of times greater than what they could gain from any other basic or hidden attribute. This was because concentration affected players' control over their physical bodies and mana, aside from being the resource necessary to execute combat techniques. However, even now, there were only two known methods to permanently improve one's concentration. The first was to raise one's tier, while the other was to raise one's life rating. Hence, any item that could provide a temporary boost to a player's concentration was incredibly valuable and sold for at least 10 times the price of similarly ranked items. The most inferior item that provided concentration would be at the dark gold rank. However, even at such a price, the various major powers would frantically contest for any of such items that appeared on the market. Now, however, Shifeng was telling them that it was possible to directly improve their concentration attribute. Their skepticism was only natural. Normally, raising the concentration attribute is indeed an incredibly difficult task. However, the statues here are extraordinary. The mental assault you're sensing is actually divine will. So long as you clash directly with this divine will, you'll be able to absorb a subtle amount of it, which in turn will improve your concentration slightly, Shifeng explained, chuckling. If I have to point out the most valuable features inside Lightforged City, then these statues will have to be one of them. However, the divine will of these statues can be considered a consumable. As players absorb it, the available volume will decrease. While these statues will recover their divine will over time, who knows how long it will take for them to recover. If we miss out on this opportunity, it's unlikely we'll come across another one like this in the future. So that's why you had us spend all our contribution points on concentration recovery potions, Aqua Rose exclaimed in realization. If Violet Sword's people find out about this, they'll most likely send all their peak experts to train here, regardless of the cost. After all was said and done, although Zero Wing had signed a partnership contract with Violet Sword and now possessed 100 entry slots to the ancient secret land, Zero Wing did not have a base of operations inside Violet Light City. The resources Zero Wing could obtain from the ancient secret land definitely couldn't compare to what Violet Sword could get. Violet Sword would definitely be able to secure more contribution points in Lightforged City than Zero Wing could. If Violet Sword found out about the statue's secret, it would definitely send a large number of experts to absorb the divine will here, rapidly depleting it and leaving only scraps for Zero Wings members. Alright everyone, start focusing your mind to resist the mental assault. The closer you approach these statues, the stronger the mental assault becomes. Meanwhile, the stronger the mental assault you resist, the greater the improvements you will gain. However, make sure not to be too greedy. If your consciousness leaves your body too many times, it will end up weakening the absorption rate. You might even fail to absorb any divine will. So make sure to train at an appropriate distance, Shifeng said as he looked at the others. Upon hearing Shifeng's instructions, Aqua rose and the others sat down excitedly and started resisting the mental assault of the statue before them. Ordinary experts treated concentration as an attribute that determined the number of times they could use combat techniques. However, for players like themselves who had fully unlocked their mana bodies, the concentration attribute held an entirely different meaning. By improving their concentration, they could improve their mana control, which would, in turn, allow them to execute more complex actions using mana. With this, they could accomplish things that they previously couldn't. One of the simplest examples would be breaking through the mana body's 100% threshold. With their present concentration, their mana control was at their limit. However, if they wished to break through the 100% threshold, they needed to be capable of controlling even more mana. Now that an opportunity to break through the mana body's 100% threshold was right before them, they did not wish to waste even a second. However, after everyone attempted to resist the statue's mental assault, their original excited expressions disappeared, replaced by solemnity. Their complexions had similarly turned pale. The difference between enduring and resisting the mental assault is actually this large? Aqua Rose nearly collapsed on her back after her first attempt. She had expended roughly 5% of her concentration after resisting just one mental assault. Her consciousness had even momentarily left her body, making her lose all control over herself. The experience was extremely uncomfortable and completely different from when she was just passively enduring the mental assaults. At this moment, everyone aside from Shifeng promptly retreated from their original positions, not daring to continue resisting the mental assault at the 90-yard mark. However, even Shifeng did not fare much better than everyone else. Although he had managed to resist the mental assault, the amount of divine will he absorbed was far from ideal. Moreover, just a single attempt had cost him 1/40th of his concentration. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After resisting the mental assaults for another 2 minutes, Shifeng scarcely had any concentration remaining and had no choice but to consume a concentration recovery potion. With the boost provided by the potion, his concentration recovery rate just barely surpassed his consumption rate. After training like this for around an hour, Shifeng opened his eyes and looked at the nearest statue with a depressed expression. During this past hour or so, his concentration had indeed improved. However, the improvement was basically negligible. In fact, if not for him being at the domain realm and having an accurate grasp over his own body and mental state, he wouldn't have noticed this improvement at all. If he continued at this rate, his concentration would be nowhere near the Tier 4 standard even after using all his master concentration recovery potions and training for 20 hours here. At this rate, my concentration won't reach the Tier 4 standard even after the various superpowers peak experts have already started challenging their Tier 4 promotion quest. Shifeng could not help a bitter smile at this situation. It's no wonder hardly any expert players would rely on divine will to improve their concentration standard. However, just as Shifeng was about to focus his mind to resist the next mental assault, Violet Cloud, who sat behind him, suddenly stood up and walked up to the 80-yard mark, then took a seat there. Chapter 2645 Advanced Bronze Combat Technique. Upon seeing Violet Cloud resisting a mental assault at the 80-yard mark, Aqua Rose and the others goggled in shock. After all, there were no changes to Violet Cloud's expression. It was obvious that the 80-yard mental assault posed no problem for her. In fact, she could probably move even closer to the statue. She actually managed to improve her mental condensation by so much already. At this moment, even Shifeng was astonished when he looked at Violet Cloud. If players wished to absorb divine will quickly, they could rely on mental condensation, aside from items that aided in concentration recovery. The more condensed one's mental state was when clashing with the mental assault of a divine will, the greater one's absorption rate of divine will would become. Only, there was no concrete technique to allow players to condense their mental state because a person's mental state was insubstantial. Players could only sense it and not touch it directly. The only thing players could do was focus their attention and resist distractions. At this moment, it was obvious that Violet Cloud had gained improvements in mental condensation, which strengthened her mental state significantly. As a result, she could resist a stronger mental assault. Otherwise, there was no way she could withstand the 80-yard mental assault so easily. Shifeng had long known that Violet Cloud was very talented. After all, in the past she had relied on her own strength to reach Tier 6, when over 90% of the geniuses supported by the various superpowers had ended up getting stuck at Tier 5, never to cross the final threshold. One could easily imagine how frightening Violet Cloud's talent was for her to accomplish this impossible feat without any support. However, Violet Cloud's talents had still surpassed Shifeng's expectations, despite him knowing the girl's past. This was clearly everyone's first time executing mental condensation. Not even Shifeng had learned any techniques or methods to better execute mental condensation. However, after training for just a little over an hour, Violet Cloud had actually achieved a breakthrough already. Her talent was truly terrifying. Meanwhile, Violet Cloud's sudden breakthrough spurred everyone's fighting spirit. They immediately took a few steps forward in order to test whether they could resist a stronger mental assault or not. In this situation, even Shifeng himself could not help advancing an additional 5 yards, seating himself 85 yards away from the statue before him. However, Shifeng instantly paled after resisting a mental assault at the 85-yard mark. His consciousness also turned blurry for quite some time. I advanced by just an additional 5 yards, yet I'm actually losing nearly 10% of my concentration per hit. I also barely absorbed any divine will. Sure enough, mental condensation isn't something that can be improved on so easily. Shifeng smiled bitterly as he looked at Violet Cloud resisting the 80-yard mental assaults with ease. He had expected his mental state to have improved by quite a bit after experiencing so many mental assaults at the 90-yard mark. However, it seemed that it was merely wishful thinking. It seems I can only return and slowly accumulate concentration, Shifeng thought, shaking his head, and stood up to return to his original location. As he got to his feet, the statue before him released another wave of mental pressure. This time, though, he did not try to resist it, just passively endured it. After enduring this mental assault, Shifeng immediately felt his consciousness blur slightly. His control over his body also became slightly sluggish. Overall, though, he fared a lot better than with active resistance. Despite facing the same mental assault, there's such a huge difference between passively enduring and actively resisting. If the effects of actively resisting the mental assault were the same as the result I just experienced, I would most likely be able to move within 30 yards of the statue. Shifeng could not help but sigh ruefully when he sensed the effects of passive endurance. When he reached his original position, another mental assault washed over him, nearly making him lose his footing. After experiencing this mental assault, though, he paused as a spark of inspiration flashed across his eyes. So that's the case. Why didn't I think of this before? Shifeng clenched his fists as realization dawned upon him. He then turned to the nearby statue and thought, the reason why the effects of passively enduring the mental assaults are so subdued is simply that I gave up control over my body and allowed my mental state to go along with the divine will during the brief instant of collision. However, when I actively resist the mental assault, I'm struggling against the divine will to retain control over my body. The concentration consumed in doing so is naturally much greater. With sufficiently high control over my own body, I should have a much easier time resisting the divine will. After thinking up to this point, Shifeng immediately sat down and started testing his theory. Previously, he had been fully focused on using his mental state to resist the divine will's influence. Now he chose to spread his focus across his entire body instead, to prevent anything from influencing his control over it. In the next moment, another mental assault arrived. Although Shifeng's complexion paled slightly, a smile formed on his face. Sure enough, Shifeng grew excited when he sensed the amount of concentration he had just lost. Originally, he would lose around 1/40th of his maximum concentration when resisting a 90-yard mental assault. Now, however, he had lost only 1/50th of his concentration. Although the improvement was minor, he had, at the very least, taken the first step in the correct path of resisting the mental assaults. Following which, Shifeng retreated further back and sat down just outside of the range of the statue's mental assaults. He then considered ways to further strengthen the control he had over his body, to spread his focus across his entire body as much as possible. Or to put it in another way, he tried to exert all his muscles in one direction. That way he could achieve maximum control over his body. However, this was Shifeng's first time doing such a thing. Even though he had already reached the domain realm and achieved precision control over his 5 senses and physical body, he had never tried exerting every muscle in his body in a single direction. When he actually tried doing so, he discovered what a challenge he had set up for himself. No matter how hard he tried, he succeeded with less than 10% of his muscles. Sure enough, it really is difficult. It would be great if I had a combat technique that could help adjust my muscles' direction of exertion. As Shifeng tried exerting every one of his muscles in the same direction, he felt that this feat was even more difficult than executing a bronze combat technique. After all, a bronze combat technique utilized only a portion of his muscles. Moreover, the utilized muscles wouldn't move in the same direction either. That's it. Inspiration dawned upon him as his thoughts wandered in the direction of combat techniques. Since there's no such combat technique in existence, I can just create one. Even if I can't utilize every muscle in my body, it will still be good enough if I can utilize a greater portion. After thinking so, he started creating such a combat technique. Compared to advanced combat techniques, the combat technique Shifeng was conceptualizing was much more difficult. However, with his extensive combat experience and ability to integrate advanced combat techniques into his every action, albeit just barely, creating such a combat technique wasn't an impossible task. This was just like manipulating the mana inside a magic array. The proper manipulation of the mana of a magic array could boost the magic array's power beyond what it could normally display. Meanwhile, what he needed to do now was to treat a portion of his body as a magic array and his muscles as the mana flowing through this magic array. 1 hour. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. 3 hours. 9 hours. After 10 hours of trial and error, Light-Forged City's stable space rippled. At the same time, the sound of a system notification entered Shifeng's ears, its contents echoing in his mind. System, congratulations. You have created an advanced bronze combat technique. Please name your combat technique. Learning these combat techniques was also incredibly difficult, even if players had a legacy tablet. If he could create a silver or gold combat technique and freely distribute it to the guild's core members to learn, then the standard of Zero Wings experts would rise to a whole new level. As Shifeng was lost in his thoughts, the system sent him another notification. System, please name your combat technique. If you do not name it, the system will automatically generate a name for it after 10 minutes. A name. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng said, since I created this combat technique for the purpose of training using divine will, let's call it divine change. After he named his new technique, he shifted his gaze toward the nearby statue. Currently, Violet Cloud had already advanced to the 60-yard mark. The others had similarly made significant improvements. For example, Aqua Rose, Alluring Summer and Eloafe were now at the 75-yard mark. As for melee players like Fire Dance, Gentle Snow and Yen Tianxing, although they fared slightly worse, they had reached the 80-yard mark. Their performance was much better than Shifeng's. Meanwhile, after Shifeng observed everyone for a while, Violet Cloud actually stood up from her spot and moved to the 50-yard mark. Her mental condensation's improvement speed was simply inhuman. Seems I have to give my new technique a try. Although it is only a semi-finished product, it should still improve my results by a large margin. Shifeng could not help a bitter smile when he saw Violet Cloud sit by the 50-yard mark. As the guild leader of Zero Wing, he didn't need to be the best at everything, but he definitely couldn't be the worst. Otherwise, it would simply be humiliating. Following which, Shifeng moved past the 100-yard mark and slowly walked toward the statue. Meanwhile, the Zero Wing members seated before the statue noticed his arrival and could not help shifting their attention to him. The guild leader is finally prepared to raise his concentration? The sight of Shifeng entering the range of the Divine Will's mental assaults piqued Aqua Rose's curiosity. Previously, Shifeng had moved beyond the 100-yard mark and sat quietly in a corner. This situation had confused her and everyone else. They simply could not understand what he was doing. Although they had obtained citizenship in Lightforged City and gained the qualifications to stay for however long they wanted in the city, the duration of the alchemy array they had to use prevented them from staying inside the ancient secret land for long periods. Hence, every second and minute spent inside Lightforged City was incredibly precious. However, Shifeng had actually wasted 10 whole hours doing nothing. I really can't figure out why the guild leader sat there for so long. He even wasted nearly an hour of the precious concentration recovery potion, Kola muttered as he gazed at Shifeng in confusion. Originally, their time in Lightforged City was already limited. Now that 10 hours had gone by, they had less than 2 days left. In addition, they had to take a small break once every 2 hours to relax their tense minds. To put it simply, they were pressed for time. Had Shifeng spent the past 10 hours improving his concentration standard with them, he would have most likely reached the 70 or 80-yard mark already. With the improvement speed at these locations several times better than that at the 90-yard mark, his concentration might even get upgraded to the Tier 4 standard by the time he ran out of Master Concentration Recovery Potions. While everyone was mulling over Shifeng's actions, Shifeng arrived at the 85-yard mark. However, he showed no intention of sitting down to train. Instead, he simply stood there quietly as he actively resisted the approaching mental assault. Upon coming into contact with Shifeng, the mental assault actually shattered. It shattered. How is this possible? Aqua Rose was stunned when she sensed the mental assault approaching Shifeng shatter. She turned to stare at Shifeng. Although they had their eyes shut previously in order to focus their minds while training, they could still clearly sense the mental assault with their minds. When the mental assault came into contact with Shifeng, it seemed to crash into an immovable wall and shatter. The ensuing ripple from the mental assault shattering was like a flame in darkness. It was difficult not to notice it. Guild leader, what did you do? You can actually shatter that mental assault? Kola asked, unable to suppress his curiosity. The mental assault was intangible. Just trying to actively resist it was already a difficult task. As for shattering the mental assault, that was something none of them had ever considered doing. At this moment, everyone was staring at Shifeng in confusion. I didn't do anything special. I just tried retaliating against the mental assault. I never thought that it would shatter, Shifeng said, similarly puzzled by this situation. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He had merely tried using divine change against the mental assault to test the technique's effects. He never imagined such a result. In the end, the mental assault did not affect him adversely in any way and simply disappeared like a passing breeze. Shifeng's answer and the calm look on his face rendered Aqua Rose speechless. This explanation was simply too abbreviated. What did he mean by just retaliating? Meanwhile, after Shifeng gave his explanation, he promptly stepped closer to the statue, his heart brimming with curiosity about how much progress he could make using divine change. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.